And can I ask if any Assembly member has any other disclosable pecuniary interest or other relevant interest where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Thank you very much. Could I ask you please to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meetings held on the 29th of November 2018, the 6th of December 2018 and the 13th of December 2018,
Agreed.
as well as question time held on the 20th of December to be signed by me as a correct record.
Agreed.
Right, thank you so much. We now go on to the Mayor's report. Could I ask you formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from the 7th of December 2018 to the 3rd of January 2019. Thank you.
Okay.
The Mayor will now provide an oral update of up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. Assembly members have submitted a request for a topic for inclusion within the update, which is on the matter of the challenge to the GLA's tender process on Silvertown Quays. Mr. Mayor.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning to the Assembly and those in the gallery as well. I want to start by paying tribute to you, Chair, and to Assembly Member Andrew Dismore and Steve O'Connell, who we now know will be stepping down at next year's London Assembly elections. Since being elected as Mayor, I've had the opportunity to see firsthand on many occasions the commitment you, Chair, Assembly Member O'Connell and Assembly Member Dismore showed to your local communities. I'm sure the entire Assembly will join me in thanking all three retiring members for their service and wishing all three of you all the best for your future endeavours. But that is a long way off yet.
Thank you. I'm not giving up immediately.
Chair, this week members of Parliament have done the right thing by rejecting the government's bad Brexit deal. MPs from all political parties realised that this deal would worsen life chances and reduce opportunities for future generations, not only in London, but across the UK. I've continued to stand up for the best interests of Londoners by putting pressure on the government to change its damaging approach. What happens next will define our future for decades to come, and I've been clear that it's absolutely vital that the Prime Minister now takes any prospect of a no-deal Brexit off the table for good. This means withdrawing Article 50 to stop the clock and to enable us to find a way out of this mess. Following the no-confidence vote this week, it's now unlikely that the Prime Minister will do the right thing and call a general election. It's clear that the only way forward to resolve this deadlock is to take this crucial issue out of the hands of politicians and to return it to the British public so they can have the final say. And at this important historic time for our city, I'd urge all Assembly members to join me in calling for Londoners to be given a voice in what happens next. Since we last met, Chair, I've been working on a number of strategies and initiatives to improve the lives of Londoners. This includes continuing to do everything possible to tackle violent crime, not only by cracking down on criminals, but by tackling the root causes of violent crime too. I was delighted to announce this week that Lib Peck, the London Council's Executive Member for Crime and Police Protection and leader of Lambeth Council, has been appointed to lead the new Violence Reduction Unit. Lib will bring invaluable leadership and expertise, building on her huge experience of working with community groups, London councils and partner organisations across our city. In recent weeks, I've also confirmed that my TfL fares freeze will go ahead for the third year running, making transport more affordable for millions of Londoners, launched a £38 million fund to deliver community-led housing, published evidence that shows our bold action to tackle air pollution with the ULEZ will benefit the poorest Londoners the most, and launched in London the most comprehensive air quality monitoring of any city in the world. I've also called on the government to do the right thing by waiving the £65 settled status fee for Londoners from other EU countries. Before answering your questions, Chair, I've been asked for one oral update, and that's regarding Silver Quays. This is in relation to the report of a High Court challenge to the GLA's tender process. Chair, as many Assembly members will know, Silvertown Quays is a major site in the Royal Docks Enterprise Zone with a capacity for at least 3,000 homes and thousands of jobs. Importantly, it will also provide substantial levels of business rates to fund the recently approved Enterprise Zone Delivery Plan. A procurement for a development partner for the Silvertown Quays site began under the London Development Agency in July 2011. And when the London Development Agency ceased to exist, the process was completed by the GLA. This process led to the Silvertown Partnership being appointed as the developer, and they signed a master development agreement under the previous mayor in 2013. Since then, the Silvertown Partnership secured outline planning consent in August 2016, but has not yet started construction work on the site. In April 2018, the Silvertown Partnership formally requested, under the terms of the Master Development Agreement, that the GLA agree to the transfer of the control of the company from the existing members of the partnership to a new partnership between Lendlease and Starwood. Lendlease are a major global property developer and Starwood are an equity fund manager. In mid-2018 May, the GLA consented via a mayoral decision to a change of control. We remain committed to the existing plans for the regeneration of the Silvertown Quays, but as I'm sure the Assembly will appreciate, it would not be appropriate to comment further given the ongoing legal proceedings.
Yes, Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Mayor, in view of that High Court challenge, are you satisfied that due process was followed in the purchase of the Silvertown Partnership by Lendlease and Starwood?
I am, which is why the challenge is being defended.
And you believe that those actions were in line with the original tender?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to questions to the Mayor as set out on the priority order paper. The first question is entitled Street Racing and is in the name of Assembly Member Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, street racing is extremely antisocial and very dangerous. It not only risks the lives of the public, but those doing the racing. The Met Police is taking action, but it's still a serious problem in parts of London. Residents in Dagenham, Canary Wharf and Epping have all experienced illegal street racing, and there have been incidents reported in Enfield where this has been an ongoing problem for many years. In 2017, following complaints by local residents about excessive noise, antisocial behaviour and reckless driving, the police stepped up patrols around Canary Wharf to prevent the controversial London Tunnel Run from taking place. Barking and Dagenham Council has also introduced a public space protection order for a large part of the borough to crack down on street racing. This order means that any drivers taking part in street races or performing stunts can be fined, and it gives the police and the council the power to fine any spectators. Enfield Council, supported by the Met Police, has also introduced a public space protection order, which has been in place since January 2018. This order means that using a vehicle in an antisocial manner is now being treated as a criminal offence. To crack down on the problem in Enfield, the police has also met with private management agents at a number of retail parks that have been affected by this antisocial behaviour. As a result, barriers to these sites have been installed and additional security added. While no arrests have been made in Enfield, neighbourhood officers are actively undertaking regular patrols in the area. We've also ensured that Transport for London is working to put a stop to speed and then drag racing along the A10 in Enfield. In February 2018, TfL installed 3 flexible deployment cameras along the relevant A10 stretch to monitor compliance with the 40 mph speed limit. This data is helping to prioritise speed enforcement deployments by the police. TfL also reviewed the traffic signals at this location in November 2017. On Southbury Road Junction, changes were made to improve the progression of vehicles through the traffic signals. This has reduced the number of vehicles waiting at the junction. The Met Police, TfL and local councils will continue to monitor the interventions I've mentioned to see if further measures are required to mitigate the problem. London's roads should be safe for all users, and the Met will take action against excessive speeding and those putting the lives of other road users at risk.
Morning, Mayor. Thank you for that answer. It's very comprehensive. It's obviously I brought this to you in September. I'm just sort of following up, and thank you for your answer. The situation hasn't improved markedly for local people. It's become so bad that the BBC actually did a sort of special investigation into the racing up and down. And we're just wondering if you could bring a little bit more focus, if you could speak to Commissioner, just bring a little bit more focus to end it there on the A10 in particular, because it's particularly bad. And we believe that that's sort of boosting racing elsewhere, their former little community. And I wonder if you could just focus on that in particular to help it to end, because of course you'll know that that's an economic thoroughfare and it causes all kinds of chaos if there's a really bad accident. and then it's added additional noise to locals as well. So I welcome your answer, but could I ask you just a teeny bit more focus, and could you commit to coming back to us to tell us where the situation is?
Well, Chair, Assemblymember Joanne McCartney's raised this issue with me. The Met Police, TfL, the local council, the Assemblymember have the focus, and it's right we continue to pay attention to this. I mean, we're fortunate in relation to the numbers of injuries, fatalities is not the sort of level it could be, but we've got to keep an eye on this, and I will continue to keep an eye on this, and I welcome the continual chivying and challenging, which is important.
Okay, thank you. That's enough for me.
Thank you very much. The next question is in the name of Assemblymember Curtin and relates to Brexit.
Chair, I can't think of any benefits or opportunities that crashing out of the EU on 29th of March without a deal would bring to London. The fantasy of a painless no-deal Brexit flies in the face of economic facts. We've already seen the damage done since the referendum result. For 1.3 million low-income Londoners, a weakened pound has led to food and energy price hikes and exacerbated an already challenging cost of living. For businesses in London and across the country, uncertainty has hit investment and productivity. Economic growth is below where it would otherwise have been. The CBI has said that a no-deal Brexit would result in disruption for businesses and families and will leave the UK poorer and less competitive in the long term. And just recently, Ralph Speth, the boss of Jaguar Land Rover, warned that it would lead to the closure of plants and major job losses. The independent study I published last year showed that leaving the single market and customs union would do damage to jobs, growth and livelihoods in London and the UK. These predictions have since been supported by the government's own forecasts. The London Resilient Forum's work showed that the government had failed to set out clear plans for a no-deal Brexit in key areas such as food, fuel, border disruption and essential medicine supplies. And perhaps most distressingly is the toll this has taken on the million EU Londoners and their families. They will now need to apply for settled status in the country they call home. I'm deeply concerned that the Home Office's proposed fees will prevent vulnerable people from applying and leave them subject to the government's hostile environment. The Prime Minister must address this as a matter of urgency. I've already written to her to raise these issues, but extremely disappointed have yet to receive a response.
Well, Mr. Mayor, I think you're being far too gloomy about Brexit, because Brexit is going to be a fantastic thing for this country, as you know, and it's quite strange that you use the phrase there, crashing out, because we're not going to be crashing out of the European Union. We're going to be walking into our freedom. And the greatest wisdom that I've heard in the last month or two is the phrase, no deal, no problem, because we'll be leaving and going into WTO rules. But, you know, there's a couple of things that you said that I don't agree with in your statement. You said that a weakened pound was bad for everything, but actually that's increased tourism. It's increased the ability of manufacturers in this country to export their goods abroad, and orders from manufacturing companies in this country are booming. In fact, economic growth is the highest in the EU over the last 9 months.
Are you going to have a question?
The question is, do you agree with the phrase, no deal, no problem?
What was the question?
Well, Chair, can I say how disappointed I am that there are only a couple of things that Senator Curtin disagrees with me about? I need to try much harder, Chair, and endeavour to do so.
I wish I had more than
time.
6 minutes, Mr. Mayor. We could talk.
Can I just say this, Chair? None of us wish he had more than 6 minutes.
I do.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right,
Wrong again, Mr. Mayor.
Assemblymember Duval.
Mr. Mayor, I mean, what do you really think of the views of some of the politicians around this table? And I look around and see, apart from the three at the end there that didn't vote to leave, I look around, I see Sean Bailey, who voted to leave the EU in the referendum. When they say Brexit is a fantastic opportunity, this fantastic opportunity that I don't quite see, what do you really think about it?
Well, Chair, I mean, there's a very good reason when I said I hope that the UKIP don't get more than 6 minutes. Tory Assembly members wanted them to have more time, because it's quite clear members of the Tory group in the Assembly agree with the stance taken by UKIP and now the Brexit alliance. And I find it fascinating that somebody who aspires to be the mayor of the greatest city in the world, the most international city in the world, a city that's benefited from being a member of the EU, but also from Europeans who are Londoners, should think Brexit is a fantastic opportunity. And I'm looking forward to anybody standing to be the Mayor of London to explain to Londoners how Brexit is a fantastic opportunity. And I'm sure he also supports the no deal, no problem logo chanted by the Brexit Alliance and chanted by the Conservative candidate to be the Mayor of London over the next few months. I'm looking forward to debating with him. Hopefully we'll have more than 6 minutes to have the debate in relation to whether Brexit is a fantastic opportunity. I'm looking forward to the debate with the Tory candidate over the next period, as I enjoyed the debate with the last Tory candidate who had similar policies, and we saw what London thought of him.
Yeah, I wonder, Mr. Mayor, if in future you refer to Assemblymember Bailey simply as Assemblymember Bailey, rather than describing him as a candidate for Mayor of London. I did say, I think 2 meetings ago, that I didn't want the mayoral campaign to be run here.
Chair.
You will, by referring to him simply as Assembly member, that will be relating to our meetings.
Chair, can I say, I apologise, I appreciate that no Tory Assembly member voted for Silvertown Bailey to be the Tory candidate, and I'll stop referring to him as the Tory candidate. I'll refer to him now.
Do simply address the matter that I raised with you, which is simply to refer to Assemblymember Bailey as Assemblymember Bailey, not as the candidate for the mayoral election. They are the same people, but we are meeting today as a meeting of the Assembly. This isn't a hustings. Okay.
Chair,
Right.
can I continue?
Yes, of
Cheers.
course.
I'm glad that's not coming off my time, Chair. Thank you very much. Mr Mayor, the language that you've just answered those questions I think is very important about the style and manner of this debate. And one of the poornesses about this debate is the use of language and some of that use of language on social media, and about how, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I listen even harder to my political opponents, and sometimes I even respect them for their views, albeit I profoundly may disagree with them. But when a member describes other political arguments, and I apologise for the use of this language, but I think I have to put it into the public domain as a retard, and then asked to withdraw that remark or not use it or think wisely of using that in the future in terms of political debates, by groups such as MenCap, Down Syndrome and the World Change Campaign, they repeat the word. Do you not think that they should reflect on their behaviour and the language they use in this debate and other political debates and think about that? Because that's exactly what Assemblymember Curtin did in terms of actually trying to propose his views and in terms of answering others who have a different view of him about their political arguments.
Chair, I think the points made by Senator Duval and the reasons why we should all be careful about use of language are ones that I fully support. And I think it's really important for us to reflect on who listens to what we say. We are seen as leaders. We are people who form opinions. And sometimes we can form opinions and we can amplify a message that I think isn't one that should be amplified. And that sort of language towards our fellow citizens is something that I don't condone. And I think it's right to be called out.
Thank you.
Okay. Assemblymember Dismore.
Thank you, Chair.
I've got a list.
Getting back to reality rather than UKIP unicorns, would you agree that the meaning of the meaningful vote this week in Parliament was that the Prime Minister suffered the biggest ever defeat of a government in history, with a majority of 230 against a deal, which scale of loss in normal times would have led inevitably to a resignation, not, as Churchill might say, KBO, regardless, sticking to red lines that have been rejected by the Commons? Isn't it about time the Prime Minister looked at the interests of the country and not just to try to paper over the massive cracks of the irreparably fractured Humpty Dumpty that's the Conservative Party?
I mean, Chair, one of the things that I did in literally the hours before the vote, but the days and the weeks before the vote, was to call upon all parliamentarians of all parties to look at the consequences of the Prime Minister's bad Brexit deal and their constituents of today and future generations. I'm really pleased that of the 73 MPs in London, only 8 supported this bad Brexit deal. I welcome the 118 Conservative MPs who rejected Theresa May's bad Brexit deal. I was in Parliament for the vote and talked to MPs from all sides. And I was shocked by the scale of the debate, as many MPs were from all sides. It is quite breathtaking that Prime Minister May is carrying on like nothing's happened. She didn't lose his vote by 2 votes or 12 votes. She lost by a record 230 votes. And it's breathtaking that she can give the impression of being flexible, pragmatic and willing to reach across. She's had 2.5 years to do so, has failed to do so. I think this leopard's not changing her spots.
And whilst there's a clear absence of a Commons majority for anything except crashing out with a no-deal Brexit, do you agree this must not be allowed to happen by default? And do you agree with what London First said, which is, quotes, "We need to stop the clock, revoke Article 50 to avoid a disastrous no-deal Brexit. If the government can't come up with a plan that commands parliamentary support, the decision should go back to the people"?
Look, absolutely. Look, we've seen from today's newspapers that the Chancellor of the Exchequer has been relaying and explaining the concerns of businesses, how bad a no-deal Brexit would be, and I welcome London First coming out with their stance over the last few weeks. The simplest thing that the Prime Minister and government could do, and one would have support of nearly the entire Houses of Commons, but nearly all business industry, is to stop the clock running down. The Prime Minister can either withdraw Article 50 or extend it, which takes the pressure off and gives Parliament, the government, time to reach a sensible decision. In my view, bearing in mind Parliament is clearly in gridlock, the sensible course of action is to give the public back the control, give them a say for the first time on whether they accept the options given by the government, with the option, of course, given to the public of staying in the EU as part of the ballot.
Well, thanks for that, because isn't it the case that a people's vote, second referendum, is in fact a strengthening of democracy, not an undermining of it, bearing in mind the lies, distortions, illegal funding and overseas interference in the first referendum? Now we can see what's actually on offer. Isn't it essential to give the people the chance to decide on the clear choice between what's on offer from the Prime Minister and remaining in the EU? Isn't it the case that the anti-democrats are the majority, that minority of hardcore leavers who are frightened that an informed electorate might come to a different conclusion?
Well, the thing is, we now know, 2.5 years on, the reality, as opposed to some of the promises made during the referendum campaign. And so the British public can now make an informed choice on, now that we know what leaving the EU means, whether they decide to proceed with that, and we're perfectly entitled to do so as citizens, or whether we want to stay in an imperfect EU and try and reform it with all the benefits that brings. And the argument that it's not democratic to give more democracy to the people, I find a strange one. And it's interesting how there are some people who are scared to give the British public a say on the deal that they are so, keen to support, one rejected overwhelmingly by Parliament.
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor, Kent County Council's Brexit preparedness plans forecast that in a no-deal scenario, Kent will have to hold up to 10,000 HGVs on a routine basis. What contingency plans does Transport for London have for the impact of this scenario on London's roads, and how might it impact the flow of essential goods like food and medicine into the city?
Well, firstly, Chair, I think it shows that the government can't even organise a traffic jam in Kent and do it properly. So it gives us a little confidence in their ability to allow us to exit the EU and it not be catastrophic. TfL have been doing lots of work in relation to contingency planning. One of the things we don't want to see is additional HGVs coming into London, which could happen, for example, if Tilbury was used more than Kent is currently being considered to do. TfL is working closely with the Deputy Mayor Fiona Twycross on the work she's doing with the London Resilience Forum to plan for how we mitigate some of the risks of a no-deal Brexit. That includes what happened to our roads. I just make this point. Many of the HGVs bring in much-needed food and other things to London and other parts of the country. So that's one of the things we're working through, the consequences of no-deal, the impact not just on Dover and Kent, but the impact on London as well.
Thank you for that answer, Mr Mayor. I did see the reports of the exercise in Kent with the convoy from the airfield to Dover, and like everything overseen by Chris Grayling, it was of course a roaring success. You mentioned Tilbury. Are you considering then what impact what impact there would be on the transport system if Tilbury was to pick up some of the traffic from Dover?
we're looking not just at Tilbury, we have a number of ports in our city: Heathrow Airport, City Airport, King's Cross, St Pancras, and so all these ports are being looked at, and also the boroughs that surround them have got huge concerns. You imagine your Hillingdon in Heathrow, or Camden in King's Cross and Pancras, and Newham, and so it's not simply us from City Hall. The work Fiona's doing with the London Resilience Forum has local councils, the emergency services, TfL, utility companies. We also engage with businesses. These are serious issues, and just think of the time, energy, money, hassle that's been diverted towards this sort of stuff, and it's happening across the country, also central government, that we could be using for focusing on the NHS, on schooling, on policing, on the environment, and all the other issues that are so important to our city and our country.
Given that just-in-time supply chains will no longer work if we are out of the single market and the customs union, will you need to amend your London plan to create more storage facilities in London? Yeah,
really good question. So we have looked at whether we need to look at the issue of amending draft London plan. We don't think so, but it's one of the things we'll have to wait and see. As you'll be aware, a lot of the warehousing facilities aren't inside London, they're outside London. We would hope the government would be doing the work in relation to storage, a big issue. We've heard the Secretary of State for Health talking about the NHS being the world's biggest purchaser of fridges in 2019 because there's an issue about sell-by date of medicines and all that sort of issue. So the government are doing some coordinated work in relation to not just buying fridges, but also in relation to the issue of storage. I think it's outside the capacity of City Hall to do this. But again, one of the things we're doing is communicating with the government, not just MHCLG, but Downing Street as well.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Shah.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, in your opening report, you remarked about government's damaging approach to Brexit. Do you think that government's pro-business, post-Brexit immigration policies will be detrimental to London's economy? And how would you overcome the impact on key sectors such as NHS London, construction and hospitality industries?
Thank you for your question. I spent yesterday morning with the Business Advisory Board, which has on the board a number of, not just the cities and the countries, but world-leading businessmen and women. It was at Framestore, who are one of the world's best creative companies in relation to film, TV, games and other issues as well. There is not a business leader that I've met, including the Business Advisory Board, who is not concerned about the way the government's handling the Brexit negotiation and the consequences when we leave if there's not a good deal, or even worse, if there's a no-deal scenario. There is a very good reason why London First very recently came out in favour of the policy that they did, and I welcome their stance, because they're listening to their members who are businesses across London about the concerns that they receive. And you'll have seen the CBI, Chamber of Commerce, the FSB, others in relation to their concerns as well. I meet regularly with them. I meet regularly with business leaders, chief executives on a one-to-one basis, but also in groups. And that's one of the things I was lobbying the government about when David Davis was the Brexit Secretary. I continue to lobby the government in relation to some of the things that they need to do. I welcome actually the coverage today of what Philip Hammond has been saying and what he's been hearing from business leaders as well. But it's not just the business community. You're right in your question to reflect upon the NHS and on construction and on other issues from social care, hospitality and hotels. On the NHS, in London now, we have a record number of vacancies. There's a reason why that is. We've not seen come into London in the last couple of years the numbers of EU citizens, EEA citizens, who would fill some of those vacancies. Some of those who were here have left, not simply returned to, inverted commas, country of origin, gone to other European cities. In construction, when I speak to developers and those on sites, they're saying not only have they seen some of their staff leaving, but they've not seen staff coming after summer, as that normally happens as well. And just think about it logically. Who's going to build the homes we need if we have fewer construction workers? Of course, we can accelerate Schools for Londoners, the Construction Academy, to train up our own workforce, but there'll still be a massive, massive gap. On hospitality, you speak to anybody in that industry, whether it's restaurants, whether it's hotels, look at the cultural sector, whether it's the theatres and others. they rely on a diverse workforce which includes citizens from the European Union. And that's why it's so important for us to understand the consequence of what the government's embarking on. And that's why one of the reasons why members around here are passionate about giving the British public a say is because for the first time they now know what a deal leaving the EU would mean, and they can then decide whether to accept that with eyes wide open or stay in the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Curtin.
Cheers. Mr. Mayor, I didn't get a chance to finish my question of you earlier, but I'm glad I could hear your answers to the Labour Assembly members, because you did mention that after 2.5 years, people understand the reality of the European Union, and the European Union is falling apart. I mean, Italian and German banks are nearing the point of collapse. In France, there's civil unrest at protest at some of the measures that the EU has brought in with carbon tax and so on. So people all across Europe are very unhappy with the European Union. Now, I know that you support a people's vote. It's not likely to happen because we're probably going to sail out on WTO rules, which is the best thing for the country. But as the chairman of the board of TfL, TfL has allowed some advertisements for the people's vote to appear in Westminster Tube Station and other places. Isn't it wrong for them to allow such blatantly political advertising on such a sensitive issue?
No, I mean, TfL's policy is quite clear. Adverts aren't allowed if they promote a party or political cause or are electioneering. And the advert you refer to doesn't promote a cause associated with a specific political party. I wish it did. And I will continue to lobby my party in relation to this issue. The advertising space was paid for by People's Vote, which again is not associated with a specific political party. If any of the organisations that you support, as long as they abide by the rules, they provide copy. I'm sure TfL and their advertising partners will look at their draft adverts as well.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. But I have the TfL advertising policy here, and it also says that an advertisement will not be approved if it is likely to cause widespread or serious offence to reasonable members of the public on account of the product or service being advertised. I mean, these advertisements for the People's Vote are of a gross offence, not just to the 17.4 million people who voted to leave the European Union, but also to democracy itself. Shouldn't the adverts be banned on that basis, Mr. Mayor?
Such a snowflake. He's been triggered.
You actually had a question there.
Okay. It was a question. It was a question.
If the Mayor doesn't want to answer, I'm really out of my time nearly, so we can...
Well, all I'd say, Chair, is I'll explain what the TfL policy is, and also remind in a gentle fashion to the Assembly member that there are far, far more people in London who voted to remain than voted to leave.
Assembly Member McCartney.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I want to raise with you the issue of EU Londoners. And I know you have concerns about the process that the government is aiming to set up. And I've recently met with the chair of the East European Forum, who is extremely concerned that under the pilot scheme that the government has tested, that EU nationals who have made London their home have to provide evidence and documentary evidence of every month of their previous 5 years living here to get settled status. And many East Europeans, particularly Romanians and Poles, do not have tenancy documents. They may not have formal contracts of employment, so they will be in difficulties. Have you made those points clear to government, and has the government responded to your concerns yet?
Thank you for raising those points the way you've raised it. It's important to understand the context. EU Londoners have seen the experience of the Windrush generation and their descendants in relation to what's deemed the hostile environment consequences of the government's policies. So you're an EU Londoner, you've seen how a celebrated generation and their descendants are being treated by the government. You understandably are anxious and nervous about how much confidence you can have in the government, in the Home Office and in UK BA. We've been lobbying the government. Whenever I meet the government, I've been making this point. It's really important to address those concerns. It's really important for any process to be as easy as possible and for it to be streamlined. One of the reasons we set up the portal on our website is as a lot of the conversation we're having with EU Londoners like you referred to. And the portal is something that has credibility, the GLA, with these EU Londoners. EU Londoners are scared to go to the Home Office for advice, for obvious reasons, or UKBA. And so we provided a safe environment where this information is available, but also we're supporting outreach work to go into communities to give them assistance. I'm going to carry on lobbying the government in relation to the points you've raised. Just to give you an example of some of the concerns, I met yesterday the relevant minister from Portugal who's in charge of overseas citizens. We've got, roughly speaking, 250,000 Londoners of Portuguese descent in our city, making a massive contribution. We've got to make sure they know they're welcome in our city. We've got to make sure they know what will happen in relation to the skilled status route. But the government's got to recognise some of the concerns people have. The idea that they'll register 3.5 million people overnight and it'll be a success, there's no evidence I've seen from the past the government will be able to do that.
Indeed, and I think with local authorities being so depleted of funds and cuts from the government, that actually their ability to assist is significantly hampered. But earlier in your opening, you talked about your wish, which is our wish as well, that, you know, Article 50 is revoked and we have a people's vote. And you said you thought that all Londoners should be able to vote in that referendum. Could you expand who you would include in all Londoners?
When I think about some of the benefits that Londoners have, for example, young Londoners to get apprenticeships, to do exchange visits as a consequence of being members of the European Union. When I think about the 16, 17-year-olds deprived of votes, and I think they should have a vote. If you're above the age of 16, you should be able to vote in the new referendum. I actually would be in favour of EU citizens having a vote in a referendum. They vote in other elections. Why not a referendum? And I think these are some of the questions that will need to be addressed in relation to should there be a vote. I think there should be. And I think it's really important for us to try and include as many Londoners as we can in the process. And again, some will argue this is not democratic. I can't think of anything more democratic than widening the franchise to get more people eligible to vote.
Thank you. I have some EU Londoners have contacted me to ask whether you would support their having a vote. So I'm very pleased I'll be able to report that to them. And will you make that case strongly to government if we do go down the road of a second referendum?
I will do. I mean, my focus over the next few days is trying to persuade the government to withdraw Article 50 or extend it. That's the most pressing thing. We've got 70 days, I think, left until the clock runs out. Some people in this part of the chamber would welcome that catastrophe for ideological reasons. Some members of the Tory group and the Brexit alliance, I think it'd be catastrophic for our city.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Twycross.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Mayor, the Prime Minister and the Government may have survived a parliamentary confidence vote, but can Londoners have confidence in our government's ability to deliver a good outcome for our city over Brexit? Okay,
can I just, so since Theresa May was chosen to be the leader of the Conservative Party and has been our Prime Minister, her one focus has been the Brexit deal, at the expense of the NHS, schooling, the environment, policing. Think of all the other things that matter to our country and our city. All that has been neglected. And you can sort of understand that. If Brexit is so important, it's important that our Prime Minister spends time on doing this. She's got a cabinet that can deal with the other issues. The one issue she's been focused on has been rejected in record numbers by fellow parliamentarians. The scale of that defeat, 230, is astonishing. Only 202 MPs supported it, and nearly all of them are on the government payroll. 118 Conservative MPs voted against it. She united Parliament in ways not done for a long time. And it's important to reflect on that. And that's why it's astonishing that she's carrying on as if nothing has happened. And my disappointment with the vote yesterday was how Conservative MPs put their national party interest before the government's interest. And I'll say this, if you've been acting in the way she's been behaving for the last 2.5 years, in a parochial, tribal manner, why should a member of any other party now, in good faith, work with you to do a deal? And if in 2.5 years, these are the fruits of her labour, why do you think in 65, 70 days she'll be able to agree a better deal with parliamentarians and then persuade the EU to accept that? I think it's fantasy world. It's the world of unicorns. That's why the sensible thing to do is withdraw Article 50 to give us time to decide what to do going forward.
Thank you. And are you concerned that far from having the benefits and opportunities that some members of this Assembly have outlined this morning, a no-deal Brexit by this government is risking our reputation overseas and actually making the UK a laughing stock in Europe, which could potentially have damage to London and the livelihoods of people living in London.
All I'd say to the assemblies, if they got some time, spend some time looking at some of the international press yesterday. Look at some of the things what our allies were saying yesterday, not just about our Prime Minister, but by extension by our country. And I know Senator Bailey thinks this is a fantastic opportunity. I think it's a catastrophe.
Being viewed as a basket case clearly isn't good for London. Are you concerned that that's what people think of the UK as a whole?
I met yesterday during my business advisory board some members who do work with some of their businesses are overseas, some of their offices are overseas, and some of the stories they were telling me anecdotally about perception of us in the last few days isn't great. That's why it's so important for us to all of us to promote our city, because the people do look at what's happening in the media. If you're somebody sitting in Mumbai or in New York or in Singapore or in Sydney thinking about investment opportunities, thinking about where to study, thinking about the sorts of issues that matter to our city, and you see the way things are being conducted and what's coming from Westminster, it does have an impact. And that's why we in City Hall take seriously our role to promote our city.
And do you think the main issue is that other people aren't stepping forward to replace the current Prime Minister with the damage it could potentially do to London because they think that the problem is unsolvable, and actually we're never going to move this on if people don't accept that we're in a situation that we just can't simply get out of at the moment?
I think we'll be a lot clearer of the position on Monday when we know what the Prime Minister brings back in relation to Plan B. We'll be a lot clearer when we see what amendments have been put down from parliamentarians. But I think the bad news is that unless there is a withdrawal of Article 50, I'm extremely worried about what happens over the next few weeks and the consequences, not simply for Theresa May and the Conservative Party, but for our city and country for years and decades to come. The EU are willing to allow us to extend or withdraw. The ECJ has been quite clear in relation to the judgment late last year. So I'm unclear why the Prime Minister has been so dogmatic and stubborn about withdrawing or extending Article 50. There's no reason at all why she can't take the pressure off and then have a cool, calm discussion. It can't just be about Theresa May's job and the Conservative Party. It's got to be about our country and the jobs that will be lost as a consequence of a bad Brexit deal.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question on the order paper is from Assembly Member Berry and relates to first dibs for Londoners.
Thank you. New homes should help Londoners rent or buy a home, and City Hall's policies to build more social rented and other genuinely affordable homes are clearly key to this. But more widely, we want more open market homes, particularly those that are relatively less expensive, to help Londoners too. That's where First Dibs originated. Our current approach to First Dibs is based on a voluntary offer made by over 40 home builders, including the G15 housing associations and members of the Home Builders Federation in February 2018. This offer restricts sales and marketing of new build homes up to £350,000 to UK buyers for the first 3 months, with a head start of up to 1 month during which only Londoners can buy them. They must be advertised on my Homes for Londoners portal. It also commits home builders advertising Help to Buy homes on my portal. Help to Buy homes must be owner-occupied and cannot be second homes, so they can only be bought by people who are or want to become Londoners. My team are using the portal to monitor the First Dibs offer. It is only a snapshot in time, but right now there are 3 developments on the portal in Ealing, Waltham Forest and Newham that include properties for open market sale below £350,000 and 73 developments that include Help to Buy homes. Developments including First Dibs homes started to go on the portal in late summer last year. My team's monitoring shows that across developments advertised so far, there have been 23 homes under £350,000 and over 1,000 homes advertised for Help to Buy. Through my team's forward monitoring, we know of a further 184 First Dibs homes that will be on the portal soon, and my team will keep a record when they do. Further down the line, my team will also look at land registry and other data to monitor whether First Dibs is helping Londoners to be the ultimate buyers of more homes. All this information will feed into a review of the voluntary First Dibs offer next year. I accepted a voluntary offer from the industry as it was able to deliver immediately for Londoners, whereas using planning measures would take years for them to be adopted and have an effect. However, we need to make sure the current approach is effective. Using my team's monitoring information and other data, Next year's review will assess whether the voluntary offer is going far enough. Depending on the outcome of that review, all options are on the table, including looking again at using planning powers to achieve my goal and urging ministers to change the law.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, it is disappointing you don't have data on the sales so far to show us today. As I understand it, the key difference between this and the previous mayor's basically ineffective Concordat policy with developers is that your agreement limits actual sales to be for Londoners for 1 month and then UK residents for a further 3 months, while the previous mayor's Concordat was just about marketing homes. So you should be able to monitor more or less in real time off the land registry what's going on, and it seems to have started in February. So I'm very disappointed you're not giving us any more numbers on the sales and whether the proportion is actually changing. Do you have any idea about that?
So your assessment of the difference between this and the Concordant is not quite right. So we require, as a consequence of the deal we've got, all the properties go through the portal. So previously what happened was they'd be marketed in London at the same time as marketed elsewhere, but also not through one system. So you'd have to turn up at various places and we weren't sure how they would be marketing. This scheme means they come to London first before being marketed, let alone sold elsewhere, but through the portal. So it's a way of you as a potential, somebody who wants to buy in London as a Londoner, you know where they're being marketed and where they'll eventually be sold. And we know the numbers of people registered on the portal. I think the number for numbers registered is, I think, 24,000. We also 22,000 registered users, but also we know more than 230,000 people have used the portal so far. So we know people are using the portal. We know this is the way that the developers are agreeing to market. And so once we've got sufficient, we think 2 years is sufficient information to see the sales.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I'm looking at the press release that was put out when you launched the agreement, and you said that you called it a landmark, and you said that this was the first time you'd got promises about sales rather than just marketing.
Yes,
so it is.
Yeah, you can't.
That.
You can't. Yeah.
So if
Boris Johnson was just marketing.
Yeah.
This is selling.
So that's what I said at the beginning. I want to ask about the website particularly, because obviously that was part of the policy announcement, and the website is up and running now. I've been monitoring it. I'm on it now. There don't seem to be any. The first dibs part of your website says go here and search, but there's no choice of searching for first dibs homes, and the adverts for private sale homes don't say these are for Londoners now, get in there before the month is up. There's nothing there about first dibs, so that's quite confusing. The numbers also don't seem very high. I mean, you said there were 23 homes so far since the first dibs is
they're only available on the website in London for the first month.
But it doesn't say only Londoners or UK residents can buy them. There's no restriction.
But we know who the registered users are, they're Londoners.
So it's only for the registered users.
For the first month, they can only be sold to a Londoner. After the months 2 and month 3, they're Londoners plus the rest of UK in advance of their being marketed or sold elsewhere. What's happened previously was they were being marketed only, not for sale, in London at the same time as elsewhere around the world. So what's happened as a consequence of our policy and agreement is Londoners have a head start to the rest of the country. The UK has a head start by 3 months to the rest of the world.
Okay, great. Last night I looked, there were no homes when I looked for private sale homes under £350,000. Today there are 3 that seem to have gone up this morning. There are 3 adverts. That doesn't seem very many. Can we get a week-by-week breakdown of what's been advertised on the site so far?
No. One of the reasons why there will be fewer, there'll be few below 350 is because there are so few with the 40 developers we've got to deal with who are producing to the market properties of £350,000. One of the reasons why we chose 350 was because you have a salary of, roughly speaking, 90,000 to be able to afford a property of £350,000. You'll be aware the research we did in 2016 showed that half the properties bought by overseas buyers were properties for £500,000 or less. That's why we were concerned.
Yeah, but there's very few homes at that price. That's the point.
No, sure,
that's why I'm asking for the week-by-week breakdown. I want to see what's actually going up there.
But don't forget that the developers we have a deal with, G15 as well, are also producing homes for rent, part of the genuinely affordable homes. So on average, 38% are going to be affordable rent, so they won't be there because they're for rent, and they're allocated by
the thing is, I'm just trying to keep a track of this first dibs policy. It was an absolute mantra of yours in the 2016 election. Every time housing came up, you were there saying, first dibs for Londoners, gold bricks. We do need to be able to get the monitoring of this as soon as possible. Your review, it'll be out before the next election so that we can hold you to account.
But it's really important we speak
yes
in
or
facts.
no, ideally, because my colleague is...
I know one of the advantages of being a politician for the Green Party, you don't rely upon the facts, but the facts are we can't force developers to do anything.
I just want to know if your review will be out before the next election.
And I just want you to know the facts. And what's really important is I use
You're going to have to stop. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. If your review doesn't come out before the next election, we'll be having words.
I think we're seeing a leaflet being produced right now as John Berry speaking.
Yes, yeah. None of this mayoral election stuff. Can we go on, please, to the next question, which is from Assembly Member Copley and relates to temporary accommodation.
Thank you, Chair. It is wrong that so many Londoners, many working, most with children, live in temporary accommodation. They live in limbo for increasingly longer time periods, often outside their local area. As well as uncertainty, they face disruption to education, childcare, support networks and jobs. Others endure cramped and unsuitable conditions, sometimes in bed and breakfast accommodation. Not only is temporary accommodation impacting on the families affected, but as you highlight, the costs also fall in London Council's budgets that are already under severe pressure. One recent assessment found that London Boroughs spent £734 million on temporary accommodation last year, an increase of more than a third compared to 5 years earlier. The analysis suggested a quarter of that money came from Council's general funds as benefits fell short. That's why my team and I are doing all we can to help councils to meet the costs of temporary accommodation and crucially to provide better quality places for those affected to live. We're investing £11 million in place, a pan-London accommodation collaborative enterprise, an innovative programme to deliver 200 precision manufactured homes for boroughs to lease and use as temporary accommodation on sites where development will not start for a number of years. We're also supporting Capital Letters, a new collaborative initiative to enable boroughs to strengthen their position in a fiercely competitive market to secure private rented accommodation. I'm pleased to see this making progress after my team worked on early plans with boroughs and City Hall contributed funding towards a feasibility study. But fundamentally, the government must tackle the root causes of homelessness so fewer Londoners end up in temporary accommodation in the first place. First, ministers must properly fund London boroughs' work to prevent homelessness, including their work to meet new duties under the Homelessness Reduction Act. Second, the government must reverse their damaging welfare reforms which are fueling homelessness and making it so challenging for boroughs to accommodate homeless households. Third, as I've argued, the private rented sector must be radically overhauled to make it more secure and affordable. The ending of private rented sector tenancies is now the single largest cause of homelessness in London. Finally and fundamentally, the government needs to invest more in council and social rented housing. As Shelters Commission reminded us last week, among the many reasons to significantly boost long-term investment in social housing is that it will deliver a much better return than the huge sums currently spent on temporary accommodation. Imagine what more London could do to provide social housing with an extra £734 million to spend.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. And I'm pleased that you mentioned Place. Of course, in Lewisham we have Place Ladywell, which is modular constructed pop-up temporary accommodation, and Lewisham Council is going to be doing a further 4 more of those schemes. I wonder if you could talk, say a bit more about how much move-on accommodation for people coming out of temporary accommodation, such as hostels and refuges, has been set up through your funding programme, and if there's more you can do in that area.
I mean, move-on accommodation is so important for reasons that you've alluded to as a stepping stone. So we've funded the Tenancy Sustainable team, and they support about 3,500 clearing house properties for former rough sleepers. We've also allocated, you'll be aware, £50 million from our Affordable Homes programme to boost this work. One of the things that we know is some concern around supported housing, and there have been inadequate support for the support services. As a consequence of our lobbying the government, they've agreed that a proportion of the £50 million that I've talked about can be used for support services, and that housing costs for supported housing will remain within the welfare system. And so we're in discussions now with various providers about how much additional move-on accommodation they can provide using this money as part of the deal we've negotiated with the government.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that answer. I mean, you talked about some of the issues that we need central government to sort out. I mean, would you agree as well that there's a big issue with a lack of legal aid for people who need to challenge where they've been put into a temporary accommodation that's inappropriate? And do you think that the government needs to reverse some of the cuts that they've made to legal aid as well, which are preventing people from getting access to justice?
Well, what I want to see a change in the law. Some of the legislation is not fit for purpose and it's causing huge problems. But also we need support for advisors to give good advice to those tenants affected by some of these laws, including legislation but also regulations. So of course I'd support access to good legal advice. The changes in legal aid have caused huge problems. I think access to justice is one of the pillars of the welfare state. Access to free healthcare, access to social benefits, welfare support, but also access to legal support as well.
Thank you for that answer.
Next question is from Assemblymember O'Connell and is on the Sutton tram extension.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your support, Assemblymember O'Connell, on the development of the Sutton Link project. I remain committed to improving transport provision in Sutton, and our transport strategy sets out policy to develop proposals for this project. This is backed in TfL's business plan with £70 million from the Growth Fund formally committed to this project. The scheme will improve public transport and access to jobs in a part of London that for too long has been dependent on cars or unreliable and infrequent rail services. Crucially, it will support thousands of new homes and jobs across Sutton and Merton, which is vital to help solve London's housing shortfall. To support a potential future application for powers to construct and operate the scheme, TfL needs to demonstrate that all possible options have been considered. A public consultation on the project closed on the 6th of January 2019, with nearly 6,000 responses received. The consultation asked for views on 3 route options and whether the project should be delivered as a tram extension or as a new bus rapid transit route. TfL will report on the outcome of the consultation in the spring, and they'll then make a recommendation on the option to take forward. A second consultation is planned for September 2019. Alongside the development and assessment of options for the Sutton Link, TfL is also working closely with Sutton and Merton councils on funding options for the scheme. With major schemes such as this, funding is often complex with a number of options. I understand that good progress is being made on agreeing potential funding sources. Further significant contributions will be needed from both local sources and from national government, and I'd welcome your support in lobbying for this. While improved public transport in Sutton and Merton has been an aspiration for many years, development of options to deliver this improvement is far more advanced than it ever has been before. If the funding needed can be secured quickly, and if there are no delays during the process to gain planning consent, then services could commence in the mid-2020s. This should give your constituents the confidence that real progress is now being made.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for your kind words earlier to myself and to colleagues, but you're going to be stuck with me for a little while longer, and I will continue lobbying for many things, but particularly the tram extension, not least because my borough of Sutton is possibly the worst served for public transport within London. I am reassured by your response and around your commitment of £70 million within the business plan. The previous mayor committed 100 million, and the total cost of this keeps rising. At the moment, well, we're around about 425 million pounds. So there's a gap, which is, I think, is important. You mentioned a consultation around other options. Why did we extend the options to a bus link as well as a tram link? That came to me a little bit out of left field and to residents.
I think the last consultation was back in 2014, and I think to ensure that the works orders goes through okay, you'll be aware that part of the process is applying for a works order from the government. And I think one of the reasons was to make sure all options were, all choices were given to the local community in relation to the options they wanted. So one of the things that the TfL looked into was the difference between 2014, and the advice was a number of factors have changed since then, and for any future applications for powers to construct and operate the scheme, TfL needs to explore all possible alternatives to demonstrate that the right option has been selected, and that's what resulted in 3 route options for a tram extension, with bus rapid transit being considered as an alternative to these 2. Now, we'll just wait and see what the response is, but TfL want to be seen to be providing all the options to local residents in relation to the routes. And we want to make sure that the works order goes through smoothly as well.
Okay. Well, the consultation document claims that the options could only be delivered at a later date, which is logical, but potentially at the same time as Crossrail 2. That tends to be an element of kicking into long grass. You don't get much longer grass than Crossrail 2, Mr. Mayor. Would you like to comment on aspirational timelines?
I think that depends which option is gone for. My understanding is that, for example, for those people who are advocates of the additional tram services on Sutton, one of the options, so the advice I've been given is in the longer term, Crossrail 2 may free up space at Wimbledon for additional tram services direct from Sutton using the on-street routes. And so it depends which option it's gone for. As far as timelines are concerned, as I said in my answer, this could be up and running by the mid-2020s. As far as funding is concerned, I think TfL's contributing at the moment 70%, but you're right, there is a shortfall between what the boroughs TfL are contributing and what's needed. But, with a good wind, there's no obstacles. The earliest the consultation could start on the final scheme is 2022, with the earliest services that could begin by 2025, depending on the option selected.
But the options can be selected, Mr. Mayor, but I say the gap in the funding, I mean, you've got 70 million, which I'm pleased with. The total cost is around 425, 450. The last time the boroughs kind of put their hands in their own pockets, we talked about a much smaller figure. So there is a very substantial gap here. And I think this project is listed in 3 out of the tier 4, which is external funding is absolutely needed to make it realisable. So there is a large gap there, Mr. Mayor, isn't there?
There is, and I hope those are the points you'd make to government in relation to not just the spending review, but in relation to devolving more powers to London. This is the most advanced we've been in relation to the Sutton Tram extension. Yes. We'll start second consultation this year. There is a shortfall, and none of us have hidden from that from TfL. Actually, this time we've also we've managed to persuade, I think TfL's giving 70%, Sutton's 22%, Merton's 8%. But that still leaves a shortfall. We'll be lobbying the government in relation to spending review. We'll also be lobbying the government, not just in relation to any direct contribution they can give, but also funding schemes, whatever funding scheme that is in relation to, it could be land value capture, it could be other schemes as well. The councils themselves are looking into whether potential housing could be a way of further funding streams, but there is no doubt that funding all the options for the project is a challenge, regardless of which option is taken forward.
Okay, and lastly, for me, on a broader South London point, I mean, like me, Mr. Mayor, you're a proud South Londoner. This is a South London project. We've heard elsewhere Crossrail continuing to be a soak up public funds to an alarming rate. I've always contended that that has a potentially little benefit to South London, but that will be a debate that we probably haven't got time for. There is a consultation around reducing certain bus services around parts of South London town centres. I understand the Bakerloo line extension is kind of moving away from us in practicality terms. It could be argued, Mr. Mayor, that South London isn't really benefiting from transport infrastructure under your leadership. Would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, of course I'd like to respond to that. So let me give you some examples of the benefits South Londoners are seeing since I became Mayor. The Sutton Tram extension is the most advanced it's ever been. You'll recall, previously, the only time mayors talk about this is in the months preceding an election. We've been working on this ever since I became mayor. So this is the most advanced it has been. Croydon's seen in the recent past a 9% increase in bus services in Croydon. So they've seen an increase in bus services as a direct result of me being mayor. South Londoners have also benefited from the TfL fares freeze over the last 3 years. This year I was able to confirm for the third year in a row, TfL fares freeze. By May 2020, the average household in Sutton and Croydon will benefit £200 as a consequence of the TfL fares freeze. But also the investment we're putting into buses over the next period will benefit residents in Sutton and Croydon as well. Step-free access, another example, making sure public transport is accessible to all Londoners as well. And I'll carry on lobbying the government for the commuter line services that South Londoners suffer from to be devolved and given to TfL as well. So many examples of some of the benefits South Londoners are already seeing. I could go on. The night tube is benefiting South Londoners. They often get to a station and then use the night tube at night time, much easier than going all the way to central London, as was the case before.
Well, we don't benefit from the underground in the south, but that's enough. Thank you very much.
Okay. Next question is from Assemblymember Hall and relates to the cost of New Year's Eve fireworks.
Thank you, Chair. London's spectacular New Year's Eve fireworks is the largest annual display in Europe. It's enjoyed by over 100,000 spectators, watched by over 11 million people on TV across the UK, and is beamed out to tens of millions across the world, promoting London on the world stage. The total budget for the 2018 fireworks was £2.3 million. This is the same as 2017 and in line with the budget spent in previous years and by the previous mayor. The cost of the pyrotechnics in the fireworks event is the same as any spent by the previous mayor. On top of the £2.3 million budget, £800,000 was raised from ticket sales, which was spent on infrastructure for the event. There's no doubt that the fireworks display helps to attract millions of visitors to London every New Year's Eve, providing income for our businesses, tourist attractions and hotels. The statistics are still being analysed for the 2018 fireworks, but in 2017, over £10 million was spent by ticket holders alone, and that doesn't even factor in those who came to the event without a ticket. This year, to help promote the city and reassure Londoners, businesses, tourists and investors that London remains open to them, the theme for the fireworks was London is open. The message has never been more important, particularly for the over 1 million EU Londoners who have made this city their home and who are feeling particularly vulnerable as we approach Brexit. The fireworks display, which included a soundtrack featuring European artists, showed the world that London is proud to be a global European city and sent a clear message that this city is going to continue being open-minded, diverse and outward-looking. This isn't the first time we've themed the fireworks to convey London's values of diversity and inclusion. In 2017, the fireworks were themed around women's equality to kick off our Behind Every Great City campaign. This featured a women-only soundtrack and a projection of the Venus Simple on the Shell building.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Was anyone in your political office involved in signing off the display of the EU flag on the London Eye?
By political office, Chair, I'm not sure what the Assembly member refers to.
Okay, who signed off for the EU flag to be on the London Eye?
So, ultimately me. But as has been the case for the past 15 years, the fireworks display was produced by Jack Morton. Discussions were held between GLO officials and my mayoral director to decide the overall theme of the fireworks, which I then agreed.
Okay, fine. So on an evening that you, as the Mayor of London, should have been bringing people together, you caused yet more division. Were you just trying to cause controversy?
I'm not sure, Chair, what division the Assembly member refers to. Maybe she can explain.
Well, since you're totally obsessed with Brexit, you obviously realise it causes division, and that's all you seem to do at the moment. So given that it caused division and annoyance by many of us who voted Brexit, did you not realise it would cause controversy?
Well, I'm surprised how sensitive the Assembly member is in relation to these very important issues. I'm surprised the Assembly member is against us showing the world we're international-minded, outward-looking, pluralistic. I'm surprised any member of an assembly in London could be against making Londoners who are EU citizens feel welcome and included. We are Europeans. We are part of Europe. We're going to stay being part of Europe, and we're still a member of the European Union. So I'm not sure what's offended the Assembly member so much.
It's not just me, Mr. Mayor, it's those of us that voted Brexit. I repeat, on an evening when everybody should have been brought together, and that is your job as Mayor of this wonderful city, you should not have chosen something that was so divisive. I'm just asking you whether you didn't realise it would be divisive. You spend your entire life being surprised at what I think and say and do, but I am surprised if you didn't genuinely realise that this would be divisive. Did you not realise it would be divisive, Mr. Mayor?
I absolutely realise this would bring London together and would make Londoners who are EU citizens feeling vulnerable feel welcome in our great city. I absolutely realised the world was watching our city at a time when, because they read the press, they may feel when they see our Prime Minister that we're somehow going to become inward-looking, that we really need to make sure that they know we're not insular. And I can't think of a better way to reassure those around the world that London will carry on being an internationalist, pluralistic European city than by the fireworks display, which I thought were fantastic.
Mr. Mayor, would you not agree that your complete obsession with Brexit means that you are taking your eye off the ball? You are looking at crime levels, or we are, that are going through the roof. Everywhere is dangerous now in London. That's your responsibility. Brexit isn't. If you look at the hole in the finances of TfL, it's an absolute disgrace. That is your responsibility. Brexit isn't. When are you going to stop obsessing about Brexit and actually deal with what you are responsible for? Because from this side, all we ever see is you going on and on about Brexit. Can we please try and concentrate on what you are responsible for?
Well, Chair, you've allowed that question in order, so I'm sure you'll allow me to respond to it, and my answer will be in order as well. Because the question on fireworks display is now going into crime and transport, so it must be in order because you've allowed it. And let me just respond to the 2 points made. So the 2 points made was my focus in relation to crime and my focus in relation to transport. Let me first deal with the issue of crime. Since I became mayor, we've gone from having just one dedicated ward officer in a ward to having 2 dedicated ward officers in a ward plus a community support officer. I've lobbied the government to reverse the cuts they made over the first 8 years of this decade, when they cut £835 million from our budget. They're making further cuts of £235 million from our budget. The previous mayor failed to raise council tax to fill the massive hole left by this cuts. I've increased in my first 3 years the council tax to help manage the decline of police officer numbers caused by central government's cuts. In my first year, raising council tax to, roughly speaking, £20 million to help support the police. In my second year, raising council tax to £110 million to help support the police business rates. I'm sorry, Chair, you allowed the question to be in order.
I did allow the question.
And I'll answer both.
Members.
I'm sorry, Chair. She raised the issue of crime and transport, and as usual, you intervene in my answer.
No, you're answering the question. I think that the member might be suggesting that you're being rather verbose in responding.
Chair.
While being obsessed with
Chair,
Brexit.
Chair, I'm surprised you're telepathic and can read the mind of the Assembly, but maybe it's not a surprise. Maybe it's not a surprise at all. Let me now deal with the issue. Let me deal with about the assertion was, and the question was, why aren't you more focused on crime? And I'm explaining and giving examples of how I am focused on crime. And let me carry on. And also, we've managed to not just invest in policing to make sure we don't fall off a cliff edge, but also invest in Young Londoners too with the Young Londoners Fund. In relation to transport, because of my focus on transport, unlike the previous mayor, who managed in 8 years to increase our fares by more than 42%, I've frozen TfL fares for the first 3 years of me being mayor. In the last year, when the previous mayor was running the TfL as chairman of the board, if you exclude the operating grant, TfL's deficit was £1.5 million. We've managed to reduce that by more than half, at the same time as making sure we have unlimited bus hopper used by more than £270 million. We've managed to bring in the night tube, the previous mayor given up on, the night overground, which the previous mayor gave up on, extending step-free access and improving services across our city.
Yeah, I appreciate that you saw an open goal and you thought that you go through it, but really you only need one good kick, not loads.
At the end of the day, Mr Mayor, you may sit there and tell us what you've done, but actually the results prove that you don't know what you're doing, because crime is up and there is still a black hole in TfL's budget. So you can sit there for hours saying what you've done, but how ineffective are you going to be? Because just look at the crime rates, just look at TfL's budget. I've finished. Thank you, Chairman.
All right. Thank you.
Chair, Chair, was that a question?
No.
No.
I'm sure you knew that was rhetorical. The next question is from Assembly Member Pidgeon and relates to neighbourhood policing.
Thank you, Chair. I was elected on a commitment to restore real neighbourhood policing after years of neglect by my predecessor. We're delivering on my promise even in the face of huge financial pressures. In 2010, each ward in London had 1 sergeant, 2 police constables and 3 PCSOs working together to tackle neighbourhood crime. But unfortunately, neighbourhood policing has been cut to the bone in the 8 years before I became mayor. By 2016, most wards' neighbourhood policing had been reduced to just 1 dedicated PC and 1 dedicated PCSO. Since I became mayor, we've worked to ensure there is an increase to 2 dedicated PCs and 1 dedicated PCSO in every London ward. These local officers, who know the community and understand the local issues, are there to help gather intelligence on local neighbourhood matters, prevent and detect crime and solve local problems. They act as our local eyes and ears and are vital to keeping our community safe and helping to improve the public's trust and confidence in our police service. As part of the Police and Crime Plan, we've also ensured policing priorities are set at a local level giving police teams the flexibility to respond and resolve what really matters to people in their community, whether it's burglary, theft from cars or assaults. To help tackle the causes of crime in communities across London, we've built our public health approach, setting up a violence reduction unit, as well as a new £45 million Young Londoners Fund to provide young people with positive alternatives to crime and to help Londoners get out of criminal gangs and violence. But there's no question that tackling crime across London has been made much harder by the huge government cuts. Neighbourhood officers don't work in isolation. They're a vital part of a wider Met and community team, and the colleagues and local services they rely on are getting scarcer. We're now facing a situation where police numbers in London have fallen to the lowest levels in 15 years, and 8 years of austerity have decimated the very services that address the root causes of crime, from mental health services to youth clubs. As I've said, cuts really do have consequences, something even the Home Secretary has now admitted. I've done what I can, increasing the police element of the council tax and diverting business rates into policing. However, the reality is that unless the government steps up and reverses its huge cuts to our police, we simply won't have the officers we need to keep our city safe.
Thank you very much for your answer and your police and crime plan promise to restore neighbourhood policing and ensure each ward, and as you've just reiterated, 2 dedicated police constables and 1 PCSO. But time and time again, I've heard concerns from local communities actually about the number of PCSOs on the ground. And in September, I asked you for a breakdown of PCSOs and vacancies, and I received no answer. In November, I repeated the question, and again, I received no answer. We're now in the budget process. It's really vital that you're transparent with Londoners about what the reality is on the ground, not just your policy. So can you confirm today that you are assured that there are at least 2 dedicated ward officers and 1 PCSO operational in every ward in London?
I mean, there are fluctuations, not just in PCSO numbers, but also in DWOs across London, so because of vacancies and positions not filled. So for the PCSO numbers that I've got, the most recent number I've got is a month out of date, but the figures, because for obvious reasons, for London, police officer numbers are 29,788. For police staff, that's a reduction, by the way, since May 2016 of 1813, down 6%. It was 31,601 in May 2016. Police staff also go down, but for PCSOs you referred to, in May 2016 it was 1566. In November 2018, 1222. That's a reduction of 344, a 22% change. You'll be aware one of the reasons for that is the massive cuts made by government. We're trying to manage the decline in police officer numbers by the increased monies we've been given from City Hall. The third point I think you're alluding to is some wards haven't got their complement. And it was raised yesterday at the London Crime Prevention Board by the 4 council leaders as well. The Deputy Mayor, Steve House, and the Deputy Mayor for Police and Crime, Sophie Linden, are looking into this issue. In the South West in particular, we've noticed some vacancies for DWOs put aside the PCSO points. So we are looking into this in relation to different parts of London.
In Streatham, there are only 2 PCSOs. One of these is on long-term sick leave. So there's just 1 deployable PCSO to cover 4 wards. Is that acceptable?
Well, no, it's not. But you'll appreciate, because of the cuts made over the last 8 years, the numbers of PCSOs have gone down. If I was to give you the difference between 2010 and 2019, the numbers would be even more stark in relation to the difference reduction, I think 60-odd%. One of the challenges we have when there are vacancies is filling them as quickly as we can. If somebody's on long-term sick, it's difficult to pay for a new person to join because then we've got to keep the numbers at a certain level for funding reasons. But I'd ask you and colleagues to please let us know when you know of these issues, and the Deputy Commissioner is really keen to be kept abreast of particular issues in particular parts of London.
Okay, clearly the numbers you've given are striking, a 22% reduction over about the recent 6 months. There's clearly a recruitment issue here as well. When will the next recruitment drive begin so you can fill these posts and also fulfil your mayoral promise?
Sorry, do you mean PCSOs or police officers?
PCSOs.
So PCSOs, we've got the right number. So let me be quite clear. On PCSOs, the commitment from me was each ward will continue to have 1 PCSO.
But that's not the case.
Well, there are 600 wards in London. There are more than 600 PCSOs. So the issue isn't one of the numbers. The issue is making sure each ward has one and a dedicated PCSO. So where there is long-term sickness or where there are vacancies, we need to make sure we address that issue. That's why I'm saying, please let us know where there is an issue. Because you can make PCSOs, frankly speaking, redundant, you can't make police officers redundant. That's why you can see the reason why those numbers are going down more starkly. As far as police officers are concerned, you'll be aware of the numbers we have, record lows, and we're doing what we can to try and fill the massive gap left by central government.
Okay, but there's no recruitment drive planned.
Okay, thank you very much.
For PCSOs, no.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we welcome to the public gallery, please, pupils from St Francis Catholic Primary School in Newark. Good to see you. The next question is from Assembly Member Desai and relates to disability hate crime.
Thank you, Chair. Hate crime is unacceptable and is a criminal offence that has no place in London or across the country. However, for some communities, unfortunately, hate crime is a daily occurrence. From January to November, there were, as you rightly state, 376 reported disability hate crimes. Sadly, like all forms of hate crime, disability hate crime remains significantly underreported. This means that the true number is very likely to be higher. Reporting crime is important because not only does it provide intelligence that can lead to perpetrators being arrested and charged, but it helps to connect victims to appropriate support in a timely manner. There are many reasons why people don't report. Victims can sometimes lack confidence in coming forward or may not recognise they've been the victim of a crime. That's why we made hate crime a priority in our police and crime plan and have pledged to tackle a zero-tolerance approach. No community in London should be made to feel afraid or unwelcome because of their race, religion, gender, identity, sexuality, disability or any other characteristic, and I want victims to come forward to report and seek the help they need. We've committed over £1.1 million to support services and awareness raising for hate crime victims to ensure people can access help and support when needed. This includes the provision of specialist services for disabled people as well as general hate crime advocacy services. In addition, the online hate crime hub is investigating offences, ensuring that victims have access to support services and that harmful content is more quickly removed from the internet. I've also appointed the first ever Victims Commissioner for London, Claire Waxman, who's working with various groups in London, including Stay Safe East, who represent disabled victims of domestic abuse, and HARE Network, who work with victims of hate crime based on their disability. Let me finish by saying this. I'm proud to be Mayor of the most diverse city in the world, not just because of our social, cultural and economic might, but because we view our diversity, including Londoners with disabilities, as one of our greatest strengths. But on matters like this, the police alone cannot solve this problem. We all need to challenge hatred whenever and wherever it occurs and support and empower individuals to come forward and continue to report hate crime.
Thank you very much for that very full answer, Mr. Mayor. I commend you for the work that you and your team have done so far in this area. Can I just say this? I mean, as you rightly pointed out, underreporting and indeed low sanction detection rates are particular issues when it comes to hate crimes. I know earlier this morning, my colleague, Assembly Member Len Duval, did touch upon the issue of inappropriate and insensitive language. Clearly, it does not help when people, particularly in positions of authority, power, or have platforms, use such languages. Does it do anything to encourage confidence in people, in victims of hate crime to come forward?
It's worse than that. It's worse than that. So not only does it discourage a victim from coming forward, but it can inadvertently, I'm not saying this with the intention, encourage people to do bad behaviour. And it normalises these sorts of views. That's why it's really important for it to be called out. And we've got to call it out.
Absolutely. Mr. Mayor, you outlined a number of areas, and I made note of some of the things you said, £1.1 million being spent on victim support service and so on. Now, I mean, there are examples of good practices by, say, West Yorkshire, where the police have worked with local charities, such as United Response. Can you look at, I'm sure the Met are looking at ways of working with the third sector here, but could you encourage them through your Deputy Mayor and the Victims Commissioner to look at ways in which it can better work with the third sector?
Yeah, can I say the third sector is doing some really world-leading work here, and can I thank you for praising them for the work they're doing. Of course, Sophie Lynn will look at the work in West Yorkshire. The Met is working closely with the Disability Hate Crime Working Group and the Independent Advisory Groups to look at refreshing its training. We're also looking at how we can make sure that the hate crime liaison officers have more specialisation. And next month, there's a core working group meeting with with Disability Independent Advisory Groups and Inclusion London. I'll make sure I ask them to look into best practice from elsewhere around the country. If we can learn from others, we should do so.
Thank you for that. I think I'm sure you join me and other Assembly colleagues, certainly on this side, and I'm sure the majority on this side, that we need such campaigns to ensure that disability hate crime is not a hidden and forgotten form of hate crime.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Echelon.
On that particular one.
Yes, I'm sorry. Assembly Member Boff.
Mr Mayor, in 2014, former Assembly Member Victoria Borwick produced a report called Hidden Hate, and it was about disability hate crime. One of the recommendations that she made there was that the police adopt the Pegasus reporting system and that all attacks against disabled people should all be investigated on the basis that they could be a hate crime against disabled people. Is that something that you would be willing to take to the Metropolitan Police for them to adopt?
Chair, I'm sort of caught blind on this. Can I take it away and take it away and look into this and stuff? I'm always happy to take up good ideas and stuff. So if you wouldn't mind, let me take it away and get back to you.
Thank you very much.
Now Assembly Member Eshalome's question on rail competition.
Thank you, Chair. The Office of Rail and Road, ORR, is currently consulting on changes around how open access rail operators are regulated. Open access operators run services that are not contracted out by public sector bodies such as the DfT and TfL. There are currently no local London services provided this way, and the proposed changes do not make such services any more likely in the future. However, while the open access consultation does not offer much opportunity to improve commuter rail services in London, I've made it clear to the government on countless occasions that changing these services is badly needed. Commuters are being let down by poor reliability and service levels on Southern Rail routes operating out of London Bridge and Victoria, and Great Northern routes operating out of Moorgate. Frequent delays and cancellations are causing commuter misery and negatively affecting quality of life, productivity levels and the economy. Under the current franchise agreement, these routes will be available for refranchising in September 2021, following a 2-year reletting process. I've previously spoken with the Secretary of State about transferring contracting authority for some of these routes to TfL, which would allow customers to experience the sort of benefits enjoyed by customers on the London Overground and TfL Rail. We continue to await an update from the DfT. London Overground and TfL Rail offer lower fares and are integrated with the wider London Transport Network and report some of the highest levels of customer satisfaction and reliability in the country. The most recent ORR annual average performance statistics show that they're both in the top 5 national rail operators. The improved services is reflected in passenger numbers. Since Silverlink metro services were transferred to TfL in 2007, ridership on the like-for-like network has increased by 250%, compared with 50% for other London train operating companies. TfL's commissioner has met Keith Williams as part of the review, as part of his review on how the country's railways are organised, and TfL will be submitted evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And it's great to see that the commissioner has met with them. On that, and I totally agree with you in terms of, okay, we do need to see more competition, but actually it's about what real benefits London passengers will see from this. You said that the Commissioner will be meeting with ORR, but have TfL investigated looking at open access to provide more services across London? If not, will you commit to this?
They've not previously investigated this issue, and the reason is because the opportunities are limited, because the network already is close to capacity for much of the day. And so what we want to do is duplicate existing operations, given the additional cost that they would involve. The preferred approach from TfL, as I've said, is to gain responsibility for the suburban rail services.
One of the concerns from the RNC is that if this is allowed to go ahead, there could be more fragmentation and profiteering, because we could see some operators essentially cherry-picking which routes they want to run. And in a sense, because Network Rail will be getting that additional charge, again, Network Rail would be happy, and so would the DfT. Do you believe that there should be more scrutiny in what's being proposed on this open access? And how can we continue to push what you and I and a number of us agree with in terms of more devolution of some of those rail routes that run through London?
Well, thank you for raising the RMT's concern. I understand those concerns, particularly around the country in relation to the side of maximising revenues for Network Rail. As far as London's concerned, we can't see what there'd be attractive to a private operator to try and take advantage of the open access process. In the London context, the only operator who's taken advantage in the past is the Heathrow Express, which, as you know, standard single ticket costs £27 for the premium service that they provide. So we don't think it's going to be an issue in London going forward. What we need to do is continue to lobby the government in relation to allowing us to take charge of the suburban lines coming into London, the commuter lines coming into London. We think we can do a better job. And we've now, the point we made to the government is we've got unequivocal evidence of the better service that's provided by TfL running these things. We're going to carry on lobbying. I think any assistance that can be given from any part of the London society, from trade unions to politicians to commuters to businesses, is welcome. We're going to carry on lobbying the government.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Next question is from Assembly Member Prince and relates to an article in The Independent.
Thank you, Chair. I am delighted Assemblymember Prince found time to read my article about transport fares in The Independent at the beginning of January. I'd encourage all Assembly members and all Londoners to read this excellent article. It was published on the same day the government oversaw an increase in rail fares of 3.1%, even after record disruptions, cancellations and delays to services. As I said in the article, I'm proud of delivering real improvements to the lives of Londoners, providing them with a better transport network while keeping transport for London fares frozen. It begs the question, if I can freeze fares whilst providing for a better service for Londoners, why can't the government do the same across Britain, including the commuter line trains coming into London? The article talks about my transport policies. This includes my TfL fares freeze, which by 2020 will have saved the average London household around £200. In contrast, TfL fares increased by more than 42% in the 8 years before I became Mayor. This is in addition to my Hopper bus fare that has now saved money, not on 240 million bus journeys, as I said in the article, but actually on over 275 million bus journeys since it launched in September 2016. Despite the huge government cuts to TfL funding, we've been able to do even more to make the cost of commuting more affordable. We're also continuing to make significant investment in modernising the transport network, easing overcrowding and making travelling easier and more accessible for all Londoners. Capacity will be increased on the Circle, District, Hammersmith and City and Metropolitan lines by 33%, and major station upgrades will be progressed on the tube network. £2.3 billion is due to be spent on projects to make our streets safer and better, and we're redoubling our efforts to deal with London's toxic air. We've been able to do all this despite the government's cuts to London's transport funding by relentlessly focusing on what matters most to Londoners, by reducing waste, duplication and inefficiency, and by building good working relationships with our transport staff and the trade unions that represent them. I'm immensely proud of the work of the TfL staff and will carry on working closely with them and the unions that represent them to ensure we continue to deliver for London as a whole. The capital has one of the best transport networks in the world, the envy of many leading global cities, and this is something we should all be proud of.
Oh, right, thank you. Mr. Mayor, it was a very good article, I must say. It's just a shame that elements of it are simply not true. It is true that you have frozen some TfL fares, but you haven't frozen all TfL fares, have you? And whilst it is probably true that some Londoners who travel in London will not pay more in 2019 than they did in 2016, the vast majority of Londoners, regrettably, will pay more. And they will pay more even if they only use TfL services, Mr. Mayor. That's the truth, isn't it?
The truth is that all the services for which I'm responsible, TfL is responsible, have had their fares frozen. So on an average day, 4 million journeys benefit from the TfL fares freeze, and that includes 2.5 million bus trips that benefit from the TfL fares freeze. You're right, because part of the travel card is a consequence of the deal the government does with the privatised rail operating companies who are making massive profits. Those who have a travel card, because part of their travel card is paying for the government's deal with the privatised train operating companies, they may not benefit from seeing on their travel card a zero increase. But as far as the TfL component is concerned, they are seeing a fares freeze. And it's really important for us to celebrate the fact that for the third year running, I've been able to announce the TfL fares freeze.
Mr. Mayor, though, I've looked at the TfL website, and the only fares that TfL say they're frozen are fares on buses and trams, and single pay-as-you-go fares, and paper single fares. They're the only fares they say they've frozen. They don't say they've frozen all their fares. In fact, I could read you off a whole long list of fares that have increased. But I accept the point you make in relation to travel card, although you never use that as in your articles to make that qualification. But I do accept it, Mr. Mayor, that you don't have control over that. But you do have control on setting the caps. If I was a pay-as-you-go, so if I use my credit card or my cheque card to pay on the tube and on the buses, my cap has gone up. If I use an Oyster card, which is a TfL product, and I want to go using the buses and the trains and any other media, again, the cap has gone up. Now, you set the cap. I agree and accept you don't set the travel card, but you do set the cap, and the cap, Mr. Mayor, has gone up. You don't mention that in this article. It is not true, Mr. Mayor, that Londoners will not pay any more on TfL services. Londoners do pay more. I accept that if you only use the bus, and I've already many a times congratulated you on the hopper fare, I accept that has frozen. I accept that the single fares have frozen, but the cap has been increased, Mr. Mayor. So it is simply not true that Londoners will not pay any more. And please, if you want to write an article, which you're entitled to write, can you just make Londoners aware and not mislead them over your fares freeze?
Look, can I say, as far as I've listened carefully to what's been said, the fares for which I am responsible, those fares have been frozen. So it is a fact that millions of Londoners will benefit from Transport London's fares freeze for the third year in a row. That was in the article, and that's true. Pay-as-you-go journeys on the tube, on DLR, on the Emirates airline, and rail services where TfL fares apply are all frozen,
No,
as well as the cost
true,
of hiring.
Pay-as-you-go fares, the cap has been increased. It is not true to say that pay-as-you-go fares are frozen. Pay-as-you-go fares are not frozen. Yes, I accept the single fare has been frozen. That's correct. I accept that. But the pay-as-you-go cap, and most people who use TfL will, in some point during the day, get to the cap. The cap has been increased. You have increased the cap. Is that true? You have increased the cap?
So I've got a daily, weekly, or which cap are you referring to?
The daily cap and the weekly cap and the monthly cap. No, sorry, the daily and the weekly cap, the only two, have both been increased, Mr. Mayor. Do you accept that is the case, or do you not know that is the case?
No, what the case that I accept is that TfLs, for which I'm responsible, have been frozen. Now, some of the services we provide, there's a cross relationship in relation to other services in London, the commuter line services that I'm referring to. For those services, because of the way it works, the crossover, we've not been able to freeze those. In relation to the other things, as soon as technology allows us to do so, we make sure that people benefit from the fares freeze. There is some work we've done, and we said this in, if it's not in the article, it's in the press release. From this spring, people will benefit from the weekly cap because of the technology will then be ready. Some of the stuff is in relation to the technology, some is in relation to the way the cross-subsidy works from the privatised train operating companies as a consequence of the deal they made with government. But I don't resile from the fact that TfL fares have been frozen for the third year in a row. In fact, you can't have it both ways. On the one hand,
Mr. Mayor,
members of this
Mr. Mayor,
Assembly... Let me at least finish the point.
Look, Mr. Mayor, can I just ask you to be honest with Londoners when you're writing your articles, which you're entitled to, but you're not being honest with them because you're giving them the impression that all fares are frozen, and they're not. And it wouldn't hurt, would it, to say that you've done as much as you can do, but to be honest and say, but unfortunately I've had to put up the weekly cap, I've had to put up the daily cap, and then you can give your examples for that. That would be fair, that would be honest, and that would not be misleading. Can I move on then, Mr.
Well,
Mayor?
no, Chair, let's answer the question.
He has asked your question, yes.
And actually, when you reflect on the exchange, I think he's spoken more than I have. But let me answer the question.
Well, I think that's probably correct, really, the way the thing is set up.
But Chair, the Assembly member, and particularly the Conservative group, can't have it both ways. On the one hand, they're saying, because of my TfL fares freeze, there's a deficit in the TfL budget. So they're criticising the fares freeze. On the other hand, they're criticising my fares freeze not going far enough. So they've got to be consistent. I mean, at least criticise me on one thing, not both, because they're inconsistent with each other.
No, all I'm criticising you for, Mr. Mayor, is for misleading Londoners in the article. The principle is it. But let me just move on. because there's another part of the article that I've got an issue with as well, is that evidence suggests that TfL fares freeze is already encouraging more people to use public transport. I haven't seen any evidence to support what you're saying. All I can see, and again I've done some research, Mr Mayor, all I can see is that the numbers of people using TfL services is reducing.
So let me explain this, Chair, in terms that hopefully everyone will understand. So there's a number of things here. Number one, if you look at the London Overground, which TfL are responsible for, and TfL Rail, and the increase in usage there compared to comparable services on the commuter lines coming into London, Southern, South East and South Western, they've seen a dip, we've seen an increase. One example of the difference the fares freeze has been making. Secondly, if you look around the country in relation to buses, many cities across our country, many towns across our country have seen a massive dip in relation to bus usage. We aren't seeing those sorts of massive dips in London. Again, another reason for that could be because of the TfL fares freeze as well. If you look at the numbers of people who've used the unlimited hopper, which is linked with our policies in relation to making transport more affordable. In fact, the one thing that was wrong in the article was when I said I think 240 million journeys have benefited from the unlimited hopper. It's not 240 million, it's 270 million who benefited from the hopper. So these are examples of people benefiting from the fares freeze, which is one of the reasons why I say it makes economic sense, as well as other reasons for us to freeze fares. And I'm very proud for the Conservative group to continue reminding Londoners that this may have frozen their fares.
You see, there again, I don't disagree with what you've said. I accept what you said is the case. But that's not what you said in the article. What you said in the article is evidence suggests that TfL fares freeze is already encouraging more people to use public transport. That isn't true. The fact is, and is your example, overground services, for the latest figure I can get is for November to December, but I can tell you that from December and going all the way back to June, every single month, fewer people used the overground in those 6 months, in this recent 6 months, to the previous 6 months. So what you're saying is not true. The same is true for buses, and you can also look at the underground as well. Now, on the underground, there's been a slight increase, but if you bring together the buses and the underground and the DLR, every single 6 months previous, year on year, there's been a decline. And if you add overground figures to that, it's even worse. So what you're saying is not true. I accept what you've just said publicly here is true, but that's the point I'm making.
Chair,
you're not being honest with Londoners. You're being very selective, and you're not being truthful. If you said what you said in the article, it would make it a good article. If you said what we said in the discussion we had a bit earlier in relation to fares, it would have been a good article. But in fact, what you've done by not being truthful, you've made what should be a good article a bad one. I don't understand why you do it.
Chair, I mean, I think there's a question there, which is my response to that.
I thought that the question was, why did you say one thing in the article and another thing here?
Great. Let me deal with that. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So there's 2 points. One is the one just given to me helpfully, which is what we now have. We now have, Chair, a U-turn from the Conservative Party. They now support the Labour Mayor's fares freeze. One very important point picked up from that exchange. Can we make sure we get a transcript of that, please? I quite like that U-turn. But secondly, I think the benchmark and comparator with respect is the wrong one. So the Assembly member is comparing the last 6 months of 2018 with the first 6 months. That's not the comparator. The comparator is those transport authorities that have frozen fares, TfL, versus those that haven't. And those ones either where the government's in charge, Conservative government, we can see what's happened with other commuter trains. So that's the right comparator. The comparator is the policies that I'm pursuing versus the policies pursued by others. And we can see that London is not seeing the sort of differences seen elsewhere around the country where there isn't a Labour mayor running the show.
Thank you.
And the example I gave in relation to London Overground is the most relevant one, because you can compare like for like, because it's a similar area we're talking about. London Overground, we're in charge of, TfL, benefit from fares freeze, versus the other ones by South East, South West, and the evidence is there.
Right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, as we're in such good convivial mood, I'd like to bring one other point to you, just stretching the goalpost a bit. Barking to Gospel Oak Line, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if you read this morning's article in the City AM, but apparently, and I'm not going to lay any blame at this second in time, they're going to run out of rolling stock to run the service. Would you look into that, please, Mr. Mayor?
Chair, just to reassure the Assembly, I spoke to Bombardier on this matter recently, and I've got a meeting later on today to look into this issue.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you write to me, please?
Chair, can I also through you, agree to write to the Chair of the Transport Committee and other members of the Assembly as well?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Shah and relates to childhood mental health.
Thank you, Chair. The well-being of children in London is the cornerstone of building a healthy and successful future for our city, and I commend Mind's focus on this issue. A health inequalities strategy sets out a clear set of aims to ensure that no person's health suffers because of who they are or where they live, with better mental health at the heart of this strategy. We must ensure that we give children and young people the support they need. That's why my team and I have been working with partners, including the NHS and local government, to enhance support for young Londoners, as well as calling for the government to accelerate improvements in mental health provision and support for schools. At the end of the last school term, I wrote to London head teachers to share a toolkit of resources they can use to support the young people in their care. This includes a new website we produced with the Healthy London Partnership, collating resources on a wide range of issues, including training, guidance and digital support, as well as practical advice and guidance on implementing a whole school approach to mental health, such as being piloted by Mind. A whole school approach makes mental health and well-being everybody's business, involving governors, school leaders and staff, students, families and the wider community. My Young Londoners Fund is supporting schools and colleges across London to work in partnership to improve the mental health and well-being of their students. We're rolling out youth mental health first aid training to all state schools in London, a key commitment in our health inequality strategy. This will provide school staff with the skills and confidence to spot the signs of mental distress and guide a young person through the situation. A Healthy Schools London programme also supports schools to develop and deepen their focus on health and well-being, including mental health and emotional well-being. Assembly Member Shah will be aware that government cuts have led to unsustainable pressures on schools, the NHS, local government and youth services. I'll continue to call on ministers to prioritise the resources we need to sustain the health of children and young people.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know that in the past your team have supported a mental health project called Time to Change, which was very welcome, partially or jointly funded by Mind. Can you give a commitment that in a similar vein your team will work with London Mind with their current project working with schools?
Happy to do that commitment. I mean, the work that Mind doing in this area is fantastic, as other areas, and of course we'll work with them.
I will get them to write to you
Definitely.
to promote the project and whatever support that your team can give. Mr. Mayor, the Royal Society of Arts suggests that a whole school's approach to mental health is more effective than training one or two mental health champions. What are you doing to ensure your Thrive program learns lessons from this?
Well, first, can I make this point, which is mental health affects all of us. Mental ill health affects many of us. And that's why the approach you talked about is so important, the whole school's approach and the work Mind is doing. A number of things we're doing in relation to this. So Thrive London are having many discussions with Londoners and service providers to ensure we maximise the potential of children and young people, particularly around this issue of mental ill health. Having youth mental health first aiders is another way of ensuring schools and staff are equipped with the skills to support a young person. I myself, I think it's really important to be trained as a mental health first aider. We're increasing that not just in relation to schools and colleges, but also across places of work in London as well. And we're going to carry on supporting Thrive and the work they do in this area.
Lastly, Mr. Mayor, London's record when it comes to mental health of children and adolescents is rather poor when you look at the statistics. When you sort of work with providers like mine, can you ensure that that work is done with the view to improve the picture and the bad statistics that we have when it comes to children and adults' mental health care?
I can do that. Can I just say this, just to reassure you, Sulaiman Bashar, that when I first took charge of the London Health Board, I asked to make sure that the chair of the Cavendish Square Group, these are the group of London's 10 NHS trusts responsible for mental health services, that they also come to the London Health Board as well. And they've been really useful in the role that they've played as members of the London Health Board. Of course, I'll make sure I take on board what you've said. I just make this final point, which is mental health services for too long has been the Cinderella service of the NHS. And in relation to CAMS, children, adolescent mental health services, it's been even more depressed in relation to the lack of support given to this area. I continue to lobby for this publicly and privately. The Cavendish Square Group get it, and some of the changes you'll see over the next period will be a consequence of the work over the last 2 years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Next question is from Assembly Member Cooper and relates to biodiversity in housing estates.
First, can I thank you, Leonie, for your report, which we all agree made a valuable contribution to the debate about how new housing developments can enhance the natural environment. I agreed for my team to explore how best to take forward the recommendations you proposed, and I'm pleased to say today that many of these have already been or will soon be enacted in policy. In particular, the updated policies G5 and G6 within our draft London plan set out how we will promote urban greening and protect biodiversity in new developments. This demonstrates my commitment to making London a national park city and making more than half of London green by 2050. The introduction of an urban greening factor into the draft London plan, as recommended in your report, will help ensure that new developments are designed and built to include greening, which will provide opportunities for wildlife to thrive. The St Anne's Hospital site already supports a variety of wildlife, and any future development partner will be required to protect this. The site will also deliver a minimum of 50% affordable housing, up from 14% in the planning consent before the GLA brought it. My housing team will be publishing the tender pack to procure a development partner next month. It will set out my ambition to apply the requirements of the green infrastructure policies in my draft New London plan, including protecting and enhancing the biodiversity of the site, delivering high levels of affordable housing, empowering the local community, and delivering high quality design. We're also taking steps to protect and, where possible, enhance the site of importance for nature conservation on the south area of the St Anne's Hospital site. We'll work closely with the local NHS Trust, which owns part of the site, to ensure that a holistic approach is taken to achieve this. The redevelopment of the St Anne's Hospital site will be an exemplar of how green areas that benefit local communities and provide space for wildlife can be integrated into developments to create healthy, resilient and attractive places for Londoners to live.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. And my question actually follows on quite meaningfully, I think, from the previous discussion about Londoners and mental health, particularly child mental health, because access to green spaces is such an important area of assisting people who've got problems in that area or developing problems in that area. I just wanted to ask you a couple of things about the London plan, because the examination in public has just started this week. And one was, and I was delighted to see the urban greening factor and net biodiversity gain into the draft. I just wondered how the decision had been made to set the urban greening factor at 0.4 for residential and 0.3 for commercial. Are we quite sure that that's at a high enough level?
I think the challenge always is to be both realistic, practical and ambitious. What I think we looked into is a number of developments that have already introduced a degree of urban planning with the existing London plan. These showed a typical development should be able to achieve a score between 0.3 and 0.5. And so the scores that were proposed are in line with the scores set by other city authorities who have introduced an urban greening factor. And so there's been some look at and an evidence report has been published to support the policy and proposed score, you'll be aware all this is examined during the examination process, and so we've got to make sure that what we're putting up can withstand the scrutiny, because you'll appreciate there are some people who would want it to be minimised and to remove it altogether.
Yes, I believe some of the Assembly members here today, myself, are going to be called to give evidence in relation to a number of these matters on a similar sort of question in terms of how the rating was devised for looking at some of the non-accessible green and blue spaces, and I just wondered how the scoring for that had been devised, because I do think the accessibility of green open spaces is so vital, you know, relating it back again to Assembly Member Shah's question.
No, I agree. So in relation to the non-accessible spaces that you referred to, I mean, the main purpose of the urban greening factor is to ensure that new developments address issues from climate change adaptation to biodiversity net gain. And you're right, we are trying to make sure there's sufficient publicly accessible open space. If it's the case that it's not accessible, we still want to make sure we can do what we can. But where possible and appropriate, we are focusing on new green infrastructure that should contribute to increasing publicly accessible open space. Especially, you referred to the benefits to mental health. There are some parts of our city where there is little access to the green areas, and so we're trying to make sure that in areas which are deficient, we increase the accessibility to these green spaces as well. But some of the things we're looking into is what other parts of the country have done which have an urban greening plan, and so again, these are some things that we examined during the examination and chief process.
And as we both know, also some huge benefits in terms of mitigating air quality issues as well by including these matters within new sites. Finally, I just wanted to raise the issue which is a bit of a concern to me, which is about the boroughs and their ability to move forward on developing their own urban greening factor. Do we really feel that they've got sufficient expertise locally, and will City Hall be able to support them? Because obviously it's so important that we work hand in glove with the boroughs to make sure that we get the best that we can for London's residents.
We're really keen and happy to work with boroughs where we can. Good news is Hackney, Islington and City of London have already published versions of the urban greening factor in their own draft local plans, and they've chosen to adopt the target scores published in the draft New London plan. That's good news. We've designed the urban greening factor so it can be tailored to local needs. Of course, they're tailored by local environmental and social factors, but we're keen to work with boroughs to make sure we can maximise this. I mean, in your first question, you explained why it's so important. There are obvious benefits from climate change that we know about, good design we know about, but actually it benefits us as a city and Londoners, not just mental health, that sort of city we want to live in and stuff. So it is really important, and we're encouraging councils when it comes to their own local plans, the draft local plans, to look into what we're doing from the draft London plan.
Thanks very much, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Next question is from Assembly Member Whittle and relates to the Police Commissioner and knife crime.
I want to begin by taking this opportunity to send my condolences to the families and friends of those who have lost loved ones to violent crime in our city, which sadly includes the horrific fatal stabbing of 14-year-old Jaden Moody in Waltham Forest, whose family I met on Friday. In the exchange you referred to, as I remember, the Commissioner acknowledged that knife crime is a very big challenge, not just in London, but across the country and in big cities in particular. She set out that due to efforts from the whole of the Met, including the City Hall-funded Violent Crime Task Force, they're beginning to see that knife crime has levelled off, and the most important indicator, knife injury of under 25-year-olds, has been consistently coming down over the last 7 months of 2018. As the Commissioner pointed out, this was due to hard work by officers and staff, and I want to echo her thanks to their efforts. There's been a 15% reduction in knife injury of under 25-year-olds last year. But whilst these figures are encouraging, neither the Commissioner nor I are complacent. The level of violent crime in London is unacceptable, and any murder is one too many. Keeping Londoners safe is my number one priority, and I'm determined to do everything in my power to tackle the scourge of violence. And that's why I've increased the policing element of council tax and diverted business rates into policing. Many Assembly members, by the way, voted against my budget, which allowed me to do this. We've also funded the Violent Crime Task Force, which works around the clock, taking knives and weapons off our streets, set up violence reduction unit to tackle the root causes of crime, as well as investing £45 million in the Young Londoners Fund to give young people a path away from crime.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. In relation to that interview with the Commissioner, when she uses language like, that it's levelled off, does that not strike a, first of all, slightly complacent note, but also it feels more like she is commenting on crime as opposed to acting to the challenge of crime?
I don't think so. I think she's damned if she doesn't, and she's damned if she doesn't. She doesn't do interviews and do media and respond to questions. She's criticised for not doing media and responding to questions. And when she does, she's accused of being a commentator rather than a police officer. And so, look, she's not. Look, our commissioner is not complacent in the slightest. I think what she's trying to demonstrate is that the policing is starting to have an impact. Nowhere near the levels we'd want to see, but it's starting to have an impact in a positive sense of the word.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, but you might excuse me for being slightly confused, therefore, because it seems that even though she's saying it's levelled off, as it stands at the moment, we seem to have had the same number of people who've been killed up to this time in January as we had last time. In fact, I have, by our calculation, 7 people murdered in London, as opposed to 6 by this time last year. Now, okay, we can, go on about numbers or what have you, but whatever it is, it seems to me that what is different is that last year there was horror about it and outrage. What I'm worrying about is that this is becoming slightly normalised now.
No, there's a number of points raised there, and I want to respond in a sensitive manner because there could be bereaved family members watching this exchange. So there's 2 things. One is what the Commissioner was talking about was the data we have in relation to knives used to injure people where the victim is below the age of 25. That's where there's a particular concern. And what the Commissioner was referring to is in the 7 months towards the end of last year, we'd seen a reduction from the previous year. That's the first point. The second point is it's just worth examining for a moment the homicides that are taking place now and which the Commissioner has referred to. So in relation to the homicides in the first few weeks of this year, a number of them have been domestic violence homicides, which are as tragic and as concerning. In fact, last year we saw an increase in the number of domestic violence homicides. And so the reason why I suspect that there was huge concern last year was also the nature of the homicides. They were in a public space and people are concerned. So I don't want to trivial. Any homicide is very, very serious, but I don't want you to think anybody's normalising a homicide. Homicides are literally the most serious crime you can commit.
Fair enough, Mr. Mayor, but are you aware of the level of exasperation that there is amongst the public and the sense in which there seems to be no leadership from you and the Commissioner on this issue? Full of good intentions, perhaps, but no real leadership. As my colleague said earlier, a lot of leadership coming from London on Brexit and things like this. When it comes to this, for example, this week you started our meeting today by talking about the new appointee of the Violent Crime Reduction Unit. Now, so far as I can see, Mr. Mayor, that was a perfect opportunity to appoint a crime specialist. I cannot see for the life of me what, brilliant politician though she might be on a local level, what exactly her credentials are for this job. This requires someone who is steeped in, surely, violent crime.
Well, there's a number of points raised there, Chair, which I'll deal with in turn. So first, in relation to the issue of violent crime and exasperation, of course I understand the concerns of Londoners in relation to the increase in violent crime across our city, as indeed across the entire country over the last 5 years. I'm a Londoner, raising my family in this city, so I feel it as a parent, as a Londoner, and of course as the Mayor. And that's one of the reasons why I don't understand for the life of me why the previous Mayor, knowing there are these massive cuts, didn't increase council tax as he was entitled to do so, to help support our police, rather than seeing a massive decline in police officer numbers.
Care about it,
now, the reality is, well, there's something that says he doesn't care about police officer numbers. I find that astonishing. But, council tax precept increases pays for police officers, and so you should care about police officer.
No, I
numbers,
didn't
'cause
care
it's
about
police
the
officers.
administration.
You've run out of time. Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Twycross and relates to holiday hunger.
Thank you, Chair. In a city as rich as ours, it's shocking that this question even has to be asked. Sadly, the grim reality is that more than 500,000 young Londoners struggle for food during the school holidays, with many reportedly returning to their classrooms hungry and malnourished. Rather than working to fix this growing problem, ministers have fuelled it in recent years with an austerity programme that has proved both economically illiterate and socially damaging. We've seen a series of callous welfare reforms. Foremost amongst these is universal credit, which has already inflicted huge misery and hardship on many of the most vulnerable members of our society. Along with the freeze to working age benefits, universal credit has undoubtedly been a crucial factor in driving more Londoners to food banks. The fragmented nature of food provision makes it difficult to determine exactly how many young Londoners assessed schemes to fight food poverty over Christmas. What we know for sure is that the Trussell Trust gave out a record 134,244 emergency food parcels to Londoners in crisis in 2017-18, and over 47,000 of those went to children. The figures that are available also show that the problem is getting worse every Christmas as food banks and holiday schemes experience soaring demand for their services. I want to take this opportunity to place on the record my sincere thanks to London's voluntary and community sector for the incredible work they're doing to tackle holiday hunger in London. I'm determined to do everything in my power to help. That's why in a new London food strategy, we've made tackling this issue a priority and committed to measuring levels of household food insecurity for both adults and children for the first time ever. The data will help us to understand which groups and areas are hit the hardest and support the development of long-term solutions. We've also been working with local authorities and primary schools to understand how they can better be supported to deal with some of the symptoms and root causes of child poverty. I'll continue to support the Mayor's Fund for London's Kitchen Social Programme, which will deliver 300,000 meals by 2020 to children from low-income households who are at greater risk of hunger during the school holidays. But the only way we can solve this problem is for the government to step up, halt its austerity drive, and reverse the cuts that have been doing so much damage.
Thank you. I was pleased that you mentioned both the food strategy, which I understand is being launched this morning, and the work of the Mayor's Fund in terms of rolling out the Kitchen Social Project. What more can be done to make sure we can expand the Kitchen Social Project even further? And are there plans to expand it beyond the current programme's life?
So, thank you for your question. I mean, Kitchen Social has a target to support 330 hubs by 2020 and to provide 50,000 meals to school children in need. We're currently on target to meet that, but actually they're doing a lot more as well. They are also providing training, food donations, healthy eating demonstrations and activity sessions. So one of the things the Assembly can help in is in relation to making the case for statutory provision to ensure that during school holidays, those children who receive free school meals get assistance then as well. Because what's happening now is there is statutory provision for them to receive meals during term time. What about non-term time?
I think that would be a really welcome move. You mentioned quite a lot of the issues that government has created in terms of increasing levels of food insecurity, where you mentioned sort of higher levels of child food insecurity in London. How will your food strategy help to redress some of the impact of the government's policies?
Well, I mean, a number of things the food strategy is doing, from making accessible fresh fruit, vegetables and produce locally, pushing to private communities, to work with communities, work with parents and carers as well. We've tried to persuade the Department for Education to have some pilots in London related to some of the work they're doing. We've not been as successful as we'd have liked. We wanted a pan-London pilot. So we're going to carry on lobbying. Again, any assistance from the Assembly is greatly received. This is a good example of things that we're not required to do as City Hall, but we think it's really important to do, and we'll carry on trying to support these programmes.
Thank you.
The next question is from Assembly Member Boff and relates to childhood obesity.
Thank you, Chair. London has one of the highest childhood obesity rates in Europe, with almost 40% of children aged 10 and 11 overweight or obese. This problem can't just be swept under the carpet. It is not only unfairly harming the future life chances of many young Londoners, but placing pressure on an already strained health service. It's also, without doubt, a social justice issue. The evidence shows that it's children from poorer areas of our city who are disproportionately affected, with young people in Barking and Dagenham almost twice as likely to be overweight or obese as those from Richmond. While many of the things which could help tackle childhood obesity are the responsibility of others, the food manufacturers, the NHS, the government, other advertisers, I'm determined to do what I can with the limited powers that I have through my leadership role as Mayor. That's why I'm implementing a host of groundbreaking measures to tackle this obesity epidemic. This includes setting up a new child obesity task force headed by Paul Linley, OBE, and Professor Corinna Hawkes. We've already announced proposals to restrict the opening of new hot food takeaways within 400 metres of schools, introduced the Healthy Early Streets and Healthy Schools programmes, published a new sports and health inequality strategy, and supported initiatives like the Daily Mile. We've started getting water fountains installed also across our city. We're also banning advertising of harmful junk food and drink from the entire Transport for London network from the 25th of February. This decision follows a public consultation which found overwhelming support from Londoners. The aim of this policy is to reduce the exposure of London's children to the marketing of unhealthy products, as there's a growing body of evidence showing that the more children are exposed to junk food adverts, the more likely they are to eat these foods and become overweight or obese. Now, I know the Conservative Party is against our plans to ban junk food adverts on the TfL network and many of our other policies to tackle child obesity. We've already seen large advertisers, including McDonald's, confirm they'll continue to advertise on the TfL network under the new rules by advertising their products that are not too high in fat, salt and sugar. It would appear the ban is working in bringing about positive change even before it begins, and also shows why TfL don't anticipate this policy will have a big impact on advertising revenue. There'll always be some who argue against bold change like this and try to make light of it in an attempt to undermine a serious and effective policy. But just like with my plans to tackle air pollution in London, which the Conservative Party is also against, I know this is the right thing to do.
In the last Merrill question time, which took place on the 20th of December, you said that the advertising industry was making millions of pounds advertising junk food to children. Now, you may be aware, Mr. Mayor, that there are specific codes and guidelines which prevent advertising to children. So will you take this opportunity to correct the record for that misleading statement?
No, I don't. It's a good example of this, by the way, Chair, of a Conservative Assembly member batting for vested interest rather than the public interest. I will not resign from being an advocate for the public interest and supporting those children and their families who want to tackle the issue of obesity and overweight children.
So when you said, Mr. Mayor, that you said, and this is verbatim, Chairman, on the one hand, I have a choice, which is to listen to people who make millions and millions of pounds advertising junk food to children. You stick by that statement to the advertising industry. You're basically saying that the advertising industry is breaking their code of conduct. Is
No,
that correct?
that's not at all what I'm saying, Chair. What I'm saying is I prefer the advice I received from the National Centre for Social Research. I prefer looking at the research done by Cancer Research UK rather than lobbying from the Conservative Party for the advertising industry.
Okay. So you're saying the advertising industry is sticking to the code of guidance about not advertising to children?
No. Chair, I'm quite clear.
Because previously you said they didn't, sir.
Well, he's just asked you a straight question.
Well, which I was answering and was interrupted and not protected by the Chair. I mean, Chair, you've got to do the job impartially. At least pretend. At least pretend.
I say it's very rare for you to ask for protection.
From the Chair, yes, absolutely.
Oh, Chair, just try and pretend to be impartial for a change. It'd be nice.
I am invariably impartial, Mr. Mayor. I didn't take you up on your assertion, for example, that a member of the Assembly was in the pocket of the advertisers, which I think you said.
I think what I said was this is a good example of the Conservative Party defending vested interest and me defending the public interest. And I don't resolve from that at all. The point I was making in response to a question put to me was I receive a number of pieces of advice Some of those are from those in the advertising industry. Some of those who make a lot of money from advertising. Some of those are those who are health experts and conduct research. And I prefer to choose the advice from the latter rather than the former.
After the, Mr. Mayor, after the last question time, of course, you did a U-turn, and you, I'm glad to see that your spokesman confirmed that adverts for charity and fundraising events would not face an automatic ban, which just goes to show that questions in this assembly do work.
Well, Chair,
why did your original food
in answer to the question that I'd perform a U-turn, no. It was always the case.
No, I didn't ask you a question, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, there you go, Chair. Again, Chair, I'm doing your job for you.
Mr. Mayor, as far as I can see, Mr. Mayor, you're the one that's looking to the Chair for support because you're having a problem answering the questions. I understand that, but Mr. Arbour is not going to give you that kind of support.
Well, Chair, in response to the question from the Senator of Barclays, I'm sure there was one there.
Why did your food...
The point is this. The assertion was made that I performed a U-turn after the last MQTs. And I was politely saying to the Senator through the Chair, as is the proper form to do these things, that I didn't perform a U-turn. It's always been the case that Macmillan Cancer and others who do great work will carry on being able to advertise on TFL. And I'm really disappointed that the Conservative Party is scaremongering and scaring charities in this way.
You could write to me, Mr. Mayor, and quote the chapter and verse of where that exception was in your food strategy. Forgive
We've always been quite clear, Chair, in relation to the consultation.
Will you write to me? Would you write to me, Mr. Mayor?
No, Chair, I'll answer it now. We've got Mayor's question time. You've asked the question. Let me respond. Yeah. So the question asked is in relation to the help we can give to Macmillan Cancer. And we've been quite clear during the consultation and other discussions we've had with Macmillan and many others that they won't be caught by the junk food ban. The junk food advertising ban is deliberately targeted towards those who, through advertising, target children or their parents and carers to eat foods that are high in fat, sugar and salt. Clearly, it doesn't apply to people like Macmillan Cancer. And I'm really sorry they're being scared by Senator Member Roth.
So similarly, Mr. Mayor, you did another U-turn about, your spokesman confirmed about the advertising of olive oil, cheese, mayonnaise, soy sauce, stock food and pesto.
Oh,
the question I've
Chair,
got for you,
example.
Mr. Mayor, the question I've got for you, just to finish and make it look out easy, this is a question and then you can do an answer rather than a ridiculous statement. When are you going to start caring really about the problem of obesity amongst young people in London and put into place policies that actually work rather than the ones that are geared towards a press release?
Well, there you have it, Chair. There you have it, Chair. 4 weeks of work, working closely with the advertising industry, and that's the best he could do. Let me answer his questions. For question number one, unlike the Conservative Party, I support banning adverts for junk food on the TFL network. Number two, the Conservative Party is scaremongering, not just hard-working, fantastic charities, but also those of us who enjoy pesto, butter, soy sauce, olive oil and stock cubes. And the length the Conservative Party will do to get into the media is quite astonishing. And they're now trying to put up these straw foods to try and get into the media. So can I, through you, Chair, reassure the Assembly member that I will continue to tackle the issue of child obesity in London. The Conservative Party may laugh at those children who are suffering the consequences of obesity and overweight children. The Conservative Party may laugh at the misery it causes children and the family. The Conservative Party may laugh at the cost to our economy and productivity by obese and overweight children. The Conservative Party may laugh at the cost to the NHS of obesity and overweightness. The Conservative Party may mock our policies to tackle the issue of obesity and overweightness, but I won't do so. It's a very serious issue, and it's really important I take it seriously. I'm being interrupted, Chair, during my answer. I don't need your protection, because I'll carry on talking. And the important point... oh, here he goes. You've woken up now.
You're filibustering.
Here he goes.
You told us that you wanted to answer 4 points that he made. You've answered many more than that. I would have anticipated of any Assembly member, if they think you're going on too long, well, they should say so. It really is...
Chair, I just wish we had John Bercow rather than you.
Well, I would rather you had John Bercow on your side, because that's the way he appears to be. However, Assembly Member
Oh, they all. It's all coming. The impartial chair. It's all coming out now. This impartial chair, isn't it? It's all coming out now.
Perhaps we can look
scratch the surface.
I think I've got an undertaking that he's going to write to me and let me know when.
No
the
chair. No chair.
exceptions- No,
No
you're
chair.
not going to
No
give me
such
that
undertaking was given
information.
by. No chair.
You're not
No
going to
chair.
give me that information.
No
Thank
chair.
you.
I gave no such undertaking.
Okay.
What I
So you don't
agreed
want
to
to give me
do.
information that
What I
I've
agreed
asked
to do,
for.
Chair, was answer the question put by the
Once
Assembly
again,
member during
you won't
Mayor's
give us
question time,
information.
which is the purpose of Mayor's question
You won't
time.
give us information I've asked for.
And I support you on that because that is precisely what you did say. Yes. Right. Have you finished?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, have you
finished?
finished?
The next question is from...
I had so much more material.
Next question is from Assembly Member Dismore and relates to the executive pay gap.
Thank you, Chair. A report published last year by CIPD and the High Pay Centre found that in 2017, average chief executive officer pay in Financial Times Stock Exchange, 100 companies, FTSE 100, had increased by 23% from the previous year. It also found that 68 FTSE 100 chief executives now earn more than 100 times than that of the average UK worker's salary, £29,000, according to the ONS. It will take the average UK worker 195 years to earn the mean FTSE 100 CEO reward package. These stats make for uncomfortable reading, and while all of these companies are publicly listed and shareholders can vote on pay policies, there are many large private companies not required to follow these rules. I'm sure you'd have seen that new regulations that came into effect at the start of this year that will force UK-listed firms with more than 250 employees to disclose pay ratios and explain the gap between the earnings of top executives and workers came into effect from the start of this year. This is a positive step and should help in providing some transparency to the pay gap and give workers a voice. I've always been clear, the success of any business is a collective effort. Too often, corporate achievement is not shared fairly enough. The most important first step that any business can take towards ensuring fair pay is by ensuring that those in the lowest paid jobs are receiving a fair deal for their work. That means paying the London Living Wage, and I urge all employers to seek accreditation with the Living Wage Foundation. Beyond that, I'd like to see more employers looking seriously at the gap between the highest and lowest paid people in the organisations. This week we launched beta testing for my Good Work Standard, and my officials are now working with pioneering businesses who are eager to seek accreditation and champion the highest standards in pay and conditions. Through it, we hope to influence more and more of London's employers to pay the London Living Wage and create more high-quality, flexible work opportunities so that employees can progress in their chosen careers and benefit from the success of their companies and the economy.
Well, thank you, Mr Mayor. We think we moved from child obesity to the Fat Cat Friday, 4th of January this year, the date by which just 3 days into the working year, the average CEO of a FTSE 100 company received an amount equivalent to the take-home pay of a UK full-time worker on average pay for the whole of 2019, which is up 11% compared to last year. And the gap is wider still when compared to those on the national minimum wage. So what does this enormous executive pay gap mean for economic fairness in London?
I think our city is demonstrably unequal. It's a good example of an unequal society. And I think unequal society is not simply less productive, but they're less happy. And I think I'm really nervous about, if you think about a caravan, those at the front of the caravan trail going further and further away from those at the back of the caravan trail. That's why it's really important to have policies to not just reduce inequality, but to improve the life conditions of some of the poorest Londoners. And
would you agree with the Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development and the High Pay Centre in their call for a major overhaul of how executive pay is set in the UK, including corporate remuneration committees being more diverse in terms of gender, ethnicity and professional background, and for executive performance to be based on benchmarks including employee well-being and workforce training? And what's your view of the implications of the Prime Minister breaking her promise to include workers on company boards?
I think you raised a number of really important points. So as far as transparency is concerned, I genuinely think sunlight is the best disinfectant. That's why when I became mayor, voluntarily, I published our pay audits, not just by gender, so you can look at the gender pay gap, but also ethnicity, really, really important. We're doing some work in relation to disability and other of the protected characteristics as well. Unless you know and you can measure, how can you realise we've got a problem that needs addressing? But side by side with that's got to be an action plan. There's no point simply knowing we've got a gender pay gap or an ethnicity pay gap. We've got to have plans how we rectify that. That's what our time and the other policy we have is all about. Unfortunately, not all businesses, not all the public sector do it voluntarily. That's why there's a need for legislation to require them for them to do so. I'd like to see even small companies, where they're able to do so, publish this data. I'll give you one example. It often means some members of staff who lack confidence to ask for a pay rise will do so knowing that they see their peers doing similar work getting paid a higher salary. But in relation to representation on boards, I think it's really important for there to be, representation on boards. So you can look somebody in an eye if you're giving yourself a massive pay rise and somebody's not getting a massive pay rise, and try and justify to them why you deserve that pay rise. But also I think the criteria for giving pay rises needs to be looked into as well. And you raised some really good points in relation to some of the things a good employer should be looking at when they decide whether to give themselves a pay rise and a pat on the back.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is from Assembly Member Arnold. It relates to special educational needs.
Thanks, Chair. Our Skills for Londoners strategy sets out our ambition to ensure that all Londoners and employers have the skills they need to succeed, and work is well underway to implement it. From September, we will be able to invest our newly devolved adult education budget, and the commission process for £130 million of this has already begun. This funding will provide skills support to a range of Londoners aged 19 plus, particularly focusing on helping people with low skills and low pay to succeed and progress in London's economy. Learners aged 19 plus with special educational needs and disability are a key priority for this work, and additional learner support will be available to meet special needs. At the end of last year, we began the commissioning process for our new European Social Fund programme, which will see £65 million be invested in helping Londoners, including people with SEND, to access a range of tailored support so they can progress into the world of work. We've also launched a range of skills programmes, including our Digital Talent Programme, Construction Academy and Skills for Londoners Capital Fund, that will help meet the needs of employers through training in state-of-the-art equipment and facilities. And in November 2018, we launched our Careers for Londoners Action Plan, which includes plans to invest £4 million in careers clusters, with at least one cluster focused on SEND learners. I'm confident we're doing all we can to use the powers we have to improve SEND provision. But you'll know that despite our calls for further devolution, the government maintains responsibility for provision below the age of 19, where perhaps the most significant issues lie. We've recently undertaken a pan-London review of the availability and quality of SEND provision. A report will be published shortly, and I understand that Assembly Member Arnold will be briefed on the review next week. You'll not be surprised to learn that demand for post-16 SEND provision is projected to rise. Chair, I've expressed my concerns about SEND provision to the Secretary of State for Education when we met last October, and I continue to call on the government to provide sufficient funding to meet the increasing demand for London's stretched SEND services. I'd welcome the Assembly's support in maintaining pressure on the government to increase investment in SEND.
Well, Matt, thank you for that most comprehensive answer and the good news, and I look forward to receiving that briefing next week for that most important Pan-London review. And I'm going to be, let me see if I can be creative here and make a link. As you know, SEND is something that I am so passionate about, and it's something I would do whether I'm here or elsewhere. So let me just say to you, Mr. Mayor, that you've got a letter waiting for you, formally confirming that I will be joining my colleagues and not seeking reselection to this most worthy body in 2020. All good things must come to an end. And then linking it back to SEND, but I will continue to be championing this area of work. Can I then go on and just say, by the educational panel's reports into SEND, we heard the most distressing accounts from families about their struggle to understand what services are available and what their rights are. We also heard that sharing of best practice, and there is some really good, excellent practice out there, is much needed in this area. So a couple of asks. Will you find time in your diary to meet up with some of these parents who, during our conversations with them, they voiced their request to meet up with you. They know that you know, but they would just like maybe to be in the room with you. And will you consider funding SEND best practice sharing workshops or seminars to empower these families and practitioners to better navigate that complex maze associated with whether it's guidelines, legislation, services that are available, in fact, what's going to be coming out of the AUB in September from City Hall. That will be another added, if you like, forest around what they have to deal with now. So will you consider those two asks?
Chairman, with each of those points in turn. Firstly, Chair, can I just put on record my thanks to Jeanette, who's been a friend to me and a critical friend to me as the Mayor, which is really important in her role as the Assembly member. And I'm sure, Chair, over the course of the next few months, we'll have a chance to pay tribute to all of you who are retiring, who've made a fantastic contribution to our city, from whatever party you're from. Your passion for our city and your passion for the importance of London government is second to none, and I commend all of you, Chair, and I hope that we'll have a chance to pay tribute over the course of the next period. I know, though, and I'm afraid of this, that that won't stop you working your socks off to hold me to account over the next period, as you've done over the recent and long distance past. Chair, in relation to the specific points raised by the Assembly member, can I thank her for continuing to make sure these issues are on my radar. You'll appreciate, for very good reasons, often these are forgotten about, and they can't be forgotten about. Assembly member McCartney is passionate about these as well. I'm very happy to meet with the groups you referred to at an appropriate time. We'll liaise about doing that. I've been told about some of the great projects taking place, and we support them financially and in other ways, from social survivors, managed by the Sycamore Trust, does amazing work around autistic spectrum disorder. We're doing some work helping with Remploy and Barnet and Southwark College. We're also doing work with other groups across our city. Just to reassure you, Assembly member, the Enterprise Advisor Network offers support to a number of the providers across our city, including specific support for employers as well. And the good news, which you'll really appreciate, is the Good Work Standard also highlights good practice. Because you make the point about best practice. One of the things that really frustrates me is when you see somebody doing great stuff, and rather than trying to copy it and amplify it, you don't even acknowledge it. And we've got to acknowledge it and try and amplify it where we can and scale up. So I'll commit to carry on doing that, and I'll make sure Joanne and I follow up the point about the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would the Assembly please agree to suspend Standing Order 2.9b in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed? Thank you very much. Next question is from Assembly Member Devonish and relates to London transport.
Thank you, Chair. London has one of the best transport networks in the world, the envy of many leading global cities. But we must continually seek to improve transport in London, and that's exactly what we're doing. I'm proud of what we've already achieved since I became Mayor. When I was elected, I was clear that TfL needed to become leaner and more efficient to meet London's future transport needs, and I challenged it to undertake the biggest overhaul in its history to help save costs that could be reinvested in the transport network. 2.5 years on, it's a very different organisation. TfL has been restructured to bring together previously disparate functions with a smaller senior management team. Despite losing an average £700 million a year in the government grant, these changes have meant we've been able to keep our promise to freeze TfL fares and preserve concessions and reduce the hopper fare, making travel more affordable for millions of Londoners. In contrast, since 2016, the government has overseen an overall increase in national rail fares of around 9%, and on a regular basis, commuters coming into London on southern, southeastern and southwestern trains are having to enjoy a chaotic, not-for-purpose service. I'm proud that by 2020, my fares freeze would have saved an average London household around £200. This is in addition to the 275 million bus journeys that have been cheaper because of the hopper bus fare. Again, in contrast, under the previous Mayor, TfL fares increased by more than 42% in 8 years. Since 2016, we've also been able to deliver significant improvements to London's transport network. Let me give you just a few examples. TfL has increased services on the Jubilee and Northern lines and increased peak capacity on the DLR.
Mr Mayor, I have 30 seconds. Can I stop you and just ask you a question, if you wouldn't mind? Buses are the public transport for many Londoners, I'm sure you will agree, especially our senior citizens and disabled. And it avoids isolation for those very vulnerable people in their homes. Do you regret that since you've been Mayor, there's been huge cuts in the bus network in central London, please?
Which, in relation to the TfL bus network, it's important to state the facts. And the facts are that, for example, over the coming year, we'll be contributing more to our bus network than any previous Mayor, approaching £700 million subsidy given towards our buses. So I'm really proud of the contribution we're making towards the buses in our city. I'm not sure if I've said this before, Chair, but this is personal to me because my dad is a bus driver.
Yes, well, thank you. And we've come to an end of the discussion on that matter. Assembly Member Eshalomi.
I just wanted to come in on this because the reality is that TfL's finances were significantly made worse under a former Tory mayor where this grant was cut. And the fact that this is now even more compounded by the fact that London doesn't get its fair share of vehicle excise duty. Based on that, and based on the fact that we saw a number of wasted projects where money was spent, one like a garden bridge that no one wanted, will you be making a case to government in the run-up to the spending review to actually make sure that London gets its fair share of funding for transport projects?
I mean, Chair, can I thank through you the question raised by the Assembly member, which is really important, which is if you compare like for like, removing an average £700 million operating grant from our city, the deficit in 2015-2016 that TfL had was £1.5 billion. £1.5 billion. And this year we've managed to reduce that by more than half. The Assembly member is right. We are losing monies that we desperately need. We are one of the. I can't think of any other transport authority in the Western world not subsidised by central government. The money's raised in London via vehicle excise duty is not being spent on London roads. It's been sent around the country. And in those circumstances, I will be lobbying the government for a decent settlement in the spending review, not just to pay for future investment in infrastructure from the Sutton Tram to the Bakerloo extension to Crossrail to other major projects we need, but to support us in relation to revenue spend as well for TfL. It's really important that we invest in transport in our city, and I would hope that Conservative members of this Assembly would join us in that lobbying.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. And the final table question is from Assembly Member Russell and relates to the zero carbon target.
Thank you, Chair. We're in the midst of a climate emergency, and the consequences of exceeding the 1.5 degrees Celsius average temperature across the globe are significant. That's why my team has produced one of the most ambitious climate change action plans of any major world city. It's one of the first to be compatible with the highest ambition of the Paris Agreement of limiting global average temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. It includes stretching carbon budgets, and its implementation will see London become zero carbon by 2050. This is far more ambitious than central government. Pioneering strategies underpinned by detailed data on London's buildings and energy systems to demonstrate how a zero carbon target can actually be achieved. I'm doing everything I can within my powers, including setting up a £500 million fund to invest in energy efficiency in the capital. Our £34 million Energy for Londoners programme will help make London's homes warm, healthy and affordable, its workplaces more energy efficient and supply the capital with more local clean energy. Our New London plan goes further than national government policy by making sure all new buildings will meet our zero carbon objectives. However, our plan highlights that as Mayor, I only have powers to deliver less than half the emission cuts required to make London zero carbon. The rest is down to national government. City Hall simply doesn't have the funding or the powers it needs. For example, government has minimum energy efficiency standards for rental properties, but the policies are riddled with loopholes and they're not properly enforced. Government needs to devolve powers to set building energy efficiency standards so we can improve and enforce them. London's been chronically underfunded for a decade. The government needs to acknowledge this and give us our fair share of energy company obligation funding.
Thank you, and I want to thank you for listening to the Greens and to this Assembly in taking the decision to declare a climate emergency. And I agree you've got one of the most ambitious climate action plans of any world city, and I also agree that you don't currently have the powers that you need. As you say, you can only get to half of what's actually got to be able to happen. Now, I just wanted to ask you about the difference between your London Environment Strategy and your zero carbon London plan. Sort of what's different in your new zero carbon plan compared to the original strategy?
I think what we set out in the plan we published, you mean the one published in December?
Yeah.
In the plan published in December is the additional powers that we would need. So what we did is we outlined in the strategy actions to make London zero carbon in a 60% reduction on 99 levels by 2030 and nearly 80% reduction on 99 levels by 2040, in line with the IPCC's recommendation. The plan we published sets out possible costs of achieving decarbonisation and it set out what the costs were going to be.
So, Mr. Mayor, can I halt you there? It covers the costs that are different. It covers the powers that you need, but it's still working to 2050, which you also confirmed in your initial thing. Now,
but it's very important because it covers the model and the analysis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So it's done much more. It's done more of the work, and that's really helpful. But it is still working to 2050. Now, the science tells us we could reach 1.5 degrees warming by 2030. That's just 12 years away. It was the basis for the Assembly motion, and it's 20 years earlier than the 2050 target. So are you planning to back up this very good extra analysis with further analysis so that you can scope out the scale of what's got to happen if we were to meet a 2030 target? Are you planning that? So it's so that you can ask the government for what you need.
Sure.
You say you don't have the powers. If you don't know what's needed to get to 2030...
Sorry, this is not a secret. We do know what's needed. So look,
you know what's needed for 2050 to be 1.5 compatible, but not for 2030.
Well, the government's not even getting to 2050, let alone 2030, so it's one step at a time. So, look, so the first thing, look, there's a number of points you raised. So I'm glad you accept, because it's really important for this to be agreed, that we in City Hall only have powers to deliver less than half the emission cuts required to make London zero carbon. That's very important acceptance that we need to accept. But we know what we need from government in relation to national policy, in relation to regulation, in relation to economic incentives, in relation to funding. My point is, we've made clear to government what's needed to get there by 2050, which they're not doing. So of course we can do the work in relation to what's needed by 2030, and that work's taking place. But the point is the government aren't even doing what's needed by 2050, let alone 2030.
The government are completely hopeless.
No,
you definitely
no,
need...
Assembly Member Russell, your time
Sorry,
is
I'm
up.
totally
It is possible that Assembly Member Cooper will enable the Mayor to give you a full answer, but I'm sure she's got her own question.
Very much, Chair. Mr Mayor, I just wanted to come back to the motion that we only passed at the end of December on declaring a climate emergency, and to thank you for taking that forward so quickly to make that declaration. I'm still very concerned, and I gather you are as well from your reply to Assembly Member Russell, that the government is not taking this seriously enough in terms of a 2050 target, let alone bringing forward the action that's needed. The Committee on Climate Change has also been making their view of government's laxness in this area very apparent. Would you agree with me that it's absolutely essential that we stick by what you've been saying around not having fracking in London, and that we should try and make sure that the government sees the foolishness of this across the rest of the country, that instead of messing around with feed-in tariffs, that they should be establishing a firm system to encourage Londoners and other people around the rest of the country to continue to install solar? We have our own solar action plan, and that we need to be pushing ahead with what we're doing to set up Energy for Londoners, which I know is coming soon, hopefully coming this year. Can you confirm that that's the case? Because this is really urgent, and we are doing what we can, and pushing, and hopefully your team are pushing the government as far as possible on this matter as well.
Can I thank the Assembly for her question and the way she put it. Look, I'm as ambitious as the next person, but it's really important our plans are ambitious, realistic and achievable. And I could very easily publish a document that gets us there by 2030, but it's not realistic. It's not achievable. And probably very few of us will be around in 2030 to be proven to have broken the promise. And what's really important is that we do what we can, but there's a danger of us going backwards. Put aside the fact we're not going as fast as we need to do. And I'm as frustrated as you are and others are in relation to the lack of assistance given to us by central government. And you're right. As a consequence of some of their policies, we're in danger of going backwards rather than accelerating progress to achieve some of the goals we've got to achieve. Now, in addition to being a world leader, as has been recognised, when you look at C40, you compare us to the other world leaders, Paris, Barcelona and New York, and we can be really proud of where we are. I also look at what other cities across the country are doing, so I'm examining what Manchester and Bristol have said recently. If it is the case, not so far being the case, that their plans are more ambitious, achievable and realistic than ours, I'll pinch their ideas. Why wouldn't I? At the moment, though, they're top-level targets. The detail there is not as much as our details, and I think our plans are very good and very robust. In relation to some of the things that we've already announced we're going to do, I'm keen to make sure we do those. and continue to make sure we work with civic society. One of the great things that you've been doing is working with civic society. Let me be quite frank. If the wrong person wins the mayoral election in May 2020, we will go backwards rather than pushing you to go forwards. That's why it's really important we carry on working with civic society, with Londoners, to put pressure not just on me as the mayor, but on the government to do much, much more.
Mr Mayor, you mentioned us being at the forefront and being really ambitious, and I just wanted to mention the government's newly launched Clean Air strategy. Along with their failure to give us access to the Clean Air Fund, would you agree with me that their Clean Air strategy does not show the ambition that we need and is not really stepping up to the level that we in London are stepping forward?
I just don't think, I don't accept that Michael Gove's seen it. I think Michael Gove's been so distracted with all the Brexit stuff and supporting his leader, he's not been focused on his daytime job, because there's no explanation for the talk he talks and the walk that's walked in this strategy. This strategy is a long way away from what has been said in the past, but I'm confident once he gives his attention to the strategy, it will be improved. The officials at City Hall are talking to the officials at DEFRA, because this strategy doesn't give us the powers or resources we need to take the steps that the Secretary of State accepts needs to be taken. And I genuinely think once he focuses on this, it will be improved, and we'll work with DEFRA to make sure we improve it.
Well, let's hope he does. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr Mayor. Well, thank you for your attendance, Mr Mayor, and thank you for your answers. This part of the meeting is now over. Can I please ask the Assembly to agree the motion set out in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Assembly Member Duval.
Which is unusual. We don't normally have one, but it's very topical, and I'd ask for this Assembly's indulgence while I move it, if you wish, once it's passed round.
Well, is there a seconder?
Seconder.
Seconded.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, it's an amendment. We can't refuse to accept the amendment, can we?
No.
Can we?
No.
So there we go. So off you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. 72 days to go. I think this is a very interesting motion in terms of the options that the government has to do to take us forward, but this is about process. And the process at the moment is the government is not in control of its legislation agenda, and whatever we may think about our different views, there isn't an option for in the House, a majority in the House, for a no-deal position. Therefore, there are only a number of options that this government can do, which is a softer type of Brexit, or it can take another course of action to move this debate forward. In the coming days, there will be a number of votes. There will be a number of votes that will bring this there. So logically, the issue's open to government. If they do not wish to pursue a softer Brexit, which they say it's not at the moment, it's not on the agenda, there's some conversations going on, then they must need to take some other steps. The other steps clearly, for me, I think we should rule out no deal, because I think that's quite obvious, because despite what people say, it's not a walk to freedom, it's a walk to chaos and anarchy, and that's what people are prepared for, and is not good in the interest of our business and economy, or our communities here in the UK. What we do need to do then is think carefully of what we need to do, whether it's an extension of time so that a decision can be reached for when or if we leave the EU, or the government actually says we can't decide, we need a further mandate, they need to go to the country. Now, if they don't want to take the risk of going to the country for a general election, then they need to think and let the people decide on a people's vote. This is now becoming a logical way to get through the impasse of the legislation chaos or traffic management issue of passing legislation within the House of Commons, never mind when it gets to the House of Lords. People forgot about that in terms of our processes that we have to debate. So therefore, very simply, I'm amending the motion. I think it's very important that London, as it say, and we as a body take a position of what happens once that parliamentary legislation is exhausted and we come and there is still no particular view. And the logical issues there are laid out before us within this amendment. And therefore, I'd ask you to support it. It doesn't really matter which side you want. I mean, I've heard, listened to Nigel Farage and his view of what he thinks is likely to happen, because he doesn't believe that the Commons or the House of Lords are going to come to a view in terms of reaching this impasse. So I think there are people that may have different positions about the options we face, but actually we're logically moving towards this. And all I say is once that parliamentary legislation process is exhausted, then we move to these processes where we can get a clearer signal of what we should be doing. Thank you. I move.
Okay. Assemblymember Twycross.
Thank you. I think we'd all agree that this Assembly has a responsibility to speak up on issues of concerns to Londoners, which means that as an Assembly, we regularly discuss issues that we, the Mayor and the GLA, don't have direct control of. Issues that do, however, have a significant impact on Londoners. And if we don't do this, we will render ourselves irrelevant. Like it or not, Brexit is the biggest constitutional and political change any of us are likely to face in our lifetime, I would hope. It is already affecting our economy and causing huge uncertainty for London, for our businesses and for individual Londoners. Not only is it clear that the current negotiations by the government are failing, the Prime Minister might have agreed a desperate deal with Europe, but she failed to recognise the need to gain the support of Parliament. She appears indifferent to getting the support of the people. She has, however, achieved the almost impossible task of uniting the country. Both Leave and Remain are against her approach and her deal. Nothing we've seen or heard so far gives me confidence that the Prime Minister will be able to come up with a solution that she can get through Parliament. Given the impasse at Westminster and the huge gamble a no-deal Brexit presents, the odds and time left are against an orderly EU exit. I don't believe members of this Assembly could really genuinely believe that a no-deal would be good for this city or the country. What they do seem to believe, however, is that they know better than the people. Given the impasse at Westminster and the huge gamble, as I've said, that a no-deal Brexit presents, taking stock, extending or withdrawing Article 50 and taking the issue to the public vote is absolutely the best way forward, and I hope members will agree that today.
Assemblymember Berry.
Very happy to support this motion. It says we should support the Mayor's call to withdraw Article 50 and restate our demand for a people's vote. And let's not forget that we are the ones in this chamber who opened up the political space for the Mayor to make such a strong call for a people's vote in the first place. And we did that with grown-up cross-party working. A motion put by us and the Liberal Democrats, subtly amended by Labour, a lot of agreement around the table and a clear call, and the Mayor followed up really quickly. It's the kind of thing I'd like to be seeing happening in the national picture at the moment. I'd love to see the Labour leadership talk to the Green leadership and the Lib Dem leadership about how we can forge a common way possible, because it's really clear what needs to happen next. We need to take no deal off the table, we need to extend Article 50, and we need to organise a people's vote on that final deal, because that deal is the final deal. Europe could not have been clearer about that, and it's fatally unpopular in Parliament, so the people must have their say. What could be more democratic than that? I fully support this motion.
Assemblymember Boff.
I'd like to propose an additional amendment on top of that, and that is to urge Jeremy Corbyn to remove his red lines on discussions with other parties, so that we can ensure that we have a deal that is good for London and good for Britain. At the moment, the only big obstacle at the moment to coming up with a solution to Brexit is the leader of the opposition's opposition to talking to the Prime Minister to try and come up with a solution. There are many different ways, obviously, of dealing with Brexit. Much as there's 50 ways to leave a lover, there's probably more to leave Europe. I know that my idea of leaving it may be completely different from members of my own group and around here. But we have to resolve this. We cannot resolve this while the leader of the opposition is saying no deal with the Prime Minister.
Is that amendment going to be accepted?
I don't think you can amend an amendment. No, we can additional amendment.
Okay.
Do I get a right to respond?
It's a bit hard
Do I
because
get right to
nobody
respond?
has proposed an original motion.
I don't think such details should be up to the
Yes.
Shall I get a right to respond, Chair?
Well, no. I've got a load of speakers. We don't actually have the name of a seconder for Assembly Member Potts.
Did you really
I will
seriously put that through?
just prolonging the agony of the whole building, I will formally second my colleague's motion.
An additional,
Shall I respond?
An additional amendment.
It isn't. It transpires this is an additional amendment, so you're not required to ask whether or not you accept
No,
it.
it's an additional amendment.
So we'll just vote on each amendment when the time comes.
You can respond to
Okay. So the next speaker that I have on my list is Assembly Member Russell. Tell us which amendment you're speaking of.
I'm speaking to the amendment from
Ladies
Assembly
amendment.
Member Duval, which I would like to give my full support to. The parliamentary process has been absolutely broken by this. And, sorry, will you... the parliamentary process has been absolutely broken. David Cameron's advisory referendum, which was about leaving the EU, but with no detail of what that meant. Brexit has still not been defined. The people who are calling for us to leave are still just saying that Brexit means Brexit. And the fact that Parliament has been unable to sort this out goes straight back to the fact that nobody actually knows what precisely is being called for. This confusion has got everyone stumped. There are serious consequences for Londoners. There are serious consequences for the peace process in Northern Ireland. Yeah. There are serious consequences for our EU neighbours and citizens in this city of ours. So I believe the only solution is to withdraw Article 50, to go back to the people for a confirmatory vote that the deal on the table is actually what they meant when they voted to leave. Thank you.
Member Pidgeon.
Thank you very much indeed. And I move to support the amendment from Assembly Member Duval. The Brexit vote in Parliament this week was the biggest, I think, probably since the Iraq War. And what a result we saw from that. Brexit is dividing our country, it's dividing Parliament, and it's dividing the main political parties, quite frankly. And it seems to have permitted the most abusive language and behaviour from individuals against both sides. And I'm sure many of us have experienced this in places like Twitter. But the only deal on the table is the one negotiated by the Conservative Prime Minister Theresa May. And it's the only one on the table that the EU have signed up to and will sign up to. But it's been rejected by our Parliament, who have taken back control, just what the referendum was all about. So in my view, I fully support this motion. We need to take no deal off the table. That is not an option for this country. And we need to put the decision back to the public, back to the people. The deal the Conservatives have negotiated versus remaining in the European Union. And my view, which I'm entitled to have, is we have the best deal being a member of the European Union at the heart of decision making, not somewhere on the outside. So let the people decide with the reality of the deal in front of them. I fully support this amendment.
Thank you very much. Assembly Member Curtin.
Thank you, Chair. And it's extraordinary that we've got this motion here today, because on the 23rd of June 2016, we had a people's vote. And the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union. And before that vote, David Cameron's government sent a pamphlet through every letterbox of every household in the country saying, your decision is final. We will implement what you decide. And the decision of the British people was to leave. And it was very, very clear before the referendum and immediately after the referendum what Brexit meant. People on both sides who wanted either to leave or to remain said that leaving, or Brexit, meant leaving the European Union, leaving the single market, and leaving the customs union. That is what Brexit means. And in 2017, there was a general election, and both the Conservatives and UKIP and Labour all stood on manifestos that said, we will leave the European Union, the single market, and the customs union. And 85% of the country voted either for the Conservatives, UKIP or Labour on those manifesto promises that we would leave the EU, the single market and the customs union. So it's very, very clear what Brexit means. But unfortunately, a small number of rather loud people who were on the losing side decided that, well, we're not happy with this. We should overturn or try to overturn the democratic will of the British people and hand back control to Parliament, give Parliament a meaningful vote. And Parliament had a meaningful vote earlier this week, and Parliament, in its great wisdom, decided to overturn the absolutely dreadful withdrawal agreement that Theresa May had agreed with the European Union, which would have kept the United Kingdom shackled as a vassal state to the European Union in a situation where we were less free and less prosperous than if we remained. Now the same people who are unhappy that Parliament's made that decision now want to have a second people's vote. But this is really overturning democracy because we've already had a vote. And it's very clear what the right thing to do is, which is now to let the process which has been put in place in Parliament play out, because the MPs have rejected the withdrawal agreement, and what will happen now is we will sail out of the European Union on World Trade Organization terms on the 29th of March of this year. And we will sail into a wonderful world of freedom and prosperity, where we take back control of our sovereignty, we take back control of our laws, we take back control of our borders, and we end the mass, rapid, unsustainable immigration that we've had over the last 20 years. And we take back control of our agriculture. We take back control of our fishing grounds. And we take back control of our trade. And we will be free to make free trade agreements with all countries around the world. We'll trade with the European Union in the same way that we trade with the United States, in the same way that we trade with China, Australia and Canada. No deal is no problem. And I'm very, very much looking forward to leaving the European Union on World Trade Organization rules. Now, this motion calls either for withdrawing Article 50, a second referendum or a general election. Well, none of those things are likely to happen. So really, if this motion passes today, it has no substance, it has no legislative force. It's merely just a little bit of virtue signalling about something which we can really do nothing about as the London Assembly. But what we should do is get behind the people, the 17.4 million people in this country, in the greatest display of democracy in this country's history, voted to leave the European Union, and we should leave in full. Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Copley.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's unusual for me to stand up and support a referendum, another referendum, because I don't actually really believe in referendums. But I've come to the conclusion that a people's vote really is the only way out of the impasse, as Assembly Member Duval called it, that we have arrived at. And I also think that people have a right to change their minds. Assembly Member Curtin kept saying take back control, and of course we all remember that on the side of a big red bus with £350 million for the NHS or whatever it was. 2.5 years later, where are we? We've got leading Brexiteers saying, don't worry, people will have enough calories to eat per day, and there'll be enough food, and we'll manage to get enough medicines. It's a far cry from these sunny uplands that were being proposed to us by the leading Brexiteers during the referendum campaign. I think Theresa May has completely and utterly messed up this process over the last 2.5 years. Having said that, I think that the real villain of the piece, of course, is David Cameron, who tried to use a referendum as a high-stakes game to solve an internal Conservative Party dispute. And I think much of the responsibility lies at his door. But Theresa May, over the last 2.5 years, hasn't brought people together. She's behaved as if there was an overwhelming vote for Brexit rather than a very, very narrow one. And she's done nothing to try and bring people together, including from the Remain side, in order to come up with a deal that would be acceptable to the vast majority of the British population. And, you know, I think people did have, there were lots of different reasons why people voted to leave. And actually there are a lot of legitimate grievances that people had. I don't actually think ultimately there was a responsibility of the European Union, but we do have to recognise a lot of people who voted to leave had big grievances with the state of the political system in this country. There will have been people who voted to leave because they didn't like the EU as what they saw as a sort of faceless bureaucracy. And yes, the EU does need democratic reform, but we can't deliver that if we're outside of it. Yes, there were people who voted to leave because of worries about immigration and about freedom of movement. And of course, there were probably some people who voted to leave just because David Cameron and George Osborne were telling them to vote Remain, which I have a little bit of sympathy with. And of course, there were people who had all of those reasons and others. But looking at the way that this whole exit process has been messed up over the last 2.5 years, I think it's perfectly legitimate to go back to people and say, do you want to think about it again? Look at the mess and the division that has been created by this vote, and maybe think again, and maybe think actually that the best deal that we can have is remaining in the European Union.
Assembly Member Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I've had the privilege of representing London on a body called the Committee of the Regions for many years. This is a body that represents cities and regions across Europe. And we have been discussing this upside down, in and out, and all the delegates there, including myself, they then were able to share that information that they gleaned through those seminars and discussions and bring them back to their cities and their regions. And absolutely there is total respect for what citizens do. There is no doubt about that. And speaking from a European perspective, we sometimes forget that the European Union is a political construct, and that it has shown time and time again that where there is a will by politicians showing leadership, there is a way, and there will be a way forward. There's no doubt about that. What we're in now is this state, this grey state, where the leadership of this country is lost. And what we're not making that up. Parliament has spoken via the crushing rejection of the leaders' Brexit deal. So therefore we have to find a way forward. I'm encouraged because there's lots of discussions now taking part in the House of Commons. I was surprised at Assembly Member's Both approach, because I would have thought he would have got up and talked about the work that many of his colleagues are doing cross-party, i.e. Nick Bowles and others, to look to explore Norway Plus, to see if there can be a gathering about that. No one can dismiss the possibilities of us joining the EEA. You can't dismiss that. And certainly there is always the World Trade Organization terms if in that sort of final solution. But what we have is now we've got to make use of the time. And I would refer colleagues to Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party's speech. And he made clear there and answered the question. He cannot speak to someone who does not want to speak to him. And let us agree that it is disgraceful that we find ourselves in this position and know that the Prime Minister has yet to reach out to the leader of the opposition party to find a way forward. So let's reject amendment number 2 because it's a total nonsense. And then just finally, I'm glad to have followed my colleague, Assembly Member Copley. I'm not a fan of referenda. I can only relate to this people's vote in terms of a second referenda. I think that is like going to offend and upset many people, and I regret that. I personally really would like us to go back and do it as we've always done it and have a general election ASAP, because it seems to me that's where the people's voice is heard. That's where we can get informed information that we can then instruct a government to do as we want to do in this current situation. Thank you.
Assemblymember Dismore.
Thank you, Chair. Just to briefly respond to Assemblymember Boff, I think it's quite right that the leader of the Labour Party has said that he'll talk to the Prime Minister if she rules out no deal as an option. I think that's a perfectly legitimate position to take, because if he doesn't rule out no deal, there's no point in actually having any discussions, because no deal is the one thing that the majority of Parliament actually agrees on, that no deal would be a disaster. So there's no point in Theresa May having discussions with whoever she likes, the other party leaders, leading parliamentarians across the House, whatever, because it still comes back to the same point. Unless she rules out no deal, there's no point in having discussions. And I think the real problem we have here is not a red line from the leader of the opposition. The real problem are the red line set down by Theresa May at the start of this process 2.5 years ago, which has led to this shambolic deal that she's negotiated with the EU that nobody likes. And I think that Assemblymember Copley's put it right, that people do have the right to change their mind. In 1975, we had a referendum as to whether we should stay in the EU. On that occasion, I voted to leave, believe it or not. But life has moved on, the world has changed. I've changed my mind compared to 1975, and I suspect that quite a few people may have changed their mind now compared to a couple of years ago when the referendum was held. Of course, as time has gone by, we've seen how that referendum was manipulated. Anybody who saw the Benedict Cumberbatch film last week, the drama documentary, can see how that happened. Now, where are the millions of Turks that are going to come and invade our country? That's not going to happen. Where's the money for the NHS? That's not going to happen either. And so it goes on. What about the interference from United States billionaires and the manipulation of social media? All that has come to light. Now, we've now got the Brexiteers' unicorn of no deal in the sunny uplands. In fact, I don't want to call it unicorn anymore, because unicorns are actually quite attractive creatures. This is a Loch Ness monster we're being offered by UKIP, a Yeti that we're being offered by UKIP. It just simply doesn't work. And I simply come back to, what will all this mean? Well, if Jacob Rees-Mogg is so keen on no deal, why is his money all being moved to Ireland? If they're so keen on it, what's their answer to the Commissioner of Metropolitan Police, who's spoken out very clearly about the impact on the security and safety, not just of London, but of the country as a whole? And so it goes on. The fact is, I don't want to eat chlorinated chicken. It's the only way we can make our economy work from the United States. And I certainly don't trust President Trump to come up with a decent deal for us, bearing in mind the trade rows he's having across the world, as protectionism is starting to hold sway. And I suspect that those on the opposite side may well have been protectionists in their time, bearing in mind their basic political philosophy. So what are they afraid of? They're afraid that people might change their mind. A narrow result of 52-48 may actually go the other way. That's what they're frightened of. They don't trust the British people. That is anti-democratic. It's not anti-democratic to ask the people to offer people their say. It's anti-democratic to deny them their say. And that's what UKIP and those Tories want to achieve.
Assemblymember Hall.
I should be brief, Chairman, not least because I've got a committee meeting in here in less than an hour, I think. To start with, all Remainers seem to want a people's vote. That's because they'll want more and more votes until they get the result that they want, which is ridiculous. The other thing is this: we've got to remember that the government has got to go back into negotiation, and to take away the possibility of a no deal, which of course is what Europe really does not want, is the most ridiculous thing that I can think of. It's not a very good negotiation tact. But the final thing I'll say to all of you is this: London is the capital of the UK. And do you not think that we should show more respect for the result of the vote, if for nothing else other than democracy? So carry on like this is a disgrace, quite frankly.
Thank you very much. Right, we'll go to the summing up on each amendment. Do you wish to? Oh,
Peter.
oh well, you hadn't indicated, Peter. Really?
Your attention, and you've not been
Well, I look forward to hearing you, Peter.
All right, okay. I won't prolong the agony too much, and we're emptying the chamber at a rate of knots anyway. Only because who cares in a way what we say. The thing is, I would just like to add to what my colleagues here have said. First of all, I actually agree with quite a lot of what Assemblymember Copley said about the terribleness of the past 2 years. That is absolutely without question. One of the reasons for that is that you've had a Prime Minister, essentially a Remainer, put in charge of doing a deal with something that she basically wants to stay in. And the fact is, that was a problem from the very, very word go. No question about that. Don't conflate, though, the past 2 years with Brexit itself. This is just something that you're doing a lot. You're saying, this is what we've ended up with, this terrible mess of all this process and what have you. And I'd agree, it's been appalling and embarrassing and damaging, right? But that's not Brexit. People were not voting, when they voted for Brexit, on a deal or a kind of deal. That seems to be the whole basis on which you are arguing. They were voting for quite different things, for fundamental things, which actually are very, very rarely discussed. Because of the past 2 years, all of the discussion about the EU and about Brexit has largely been about economic things, actually. There's been very little about sovereignty, there's been very, very little about immigration, there's been very little about all of those sorts of things that might have been the reasons that people voted. But anyway, the point is that I think what the arguments opposite show is that this is going to be played and replayed and replayed all the time like some terrible kind of ghost tale. Because you lost, you simply can't accept that you lost. All I would say to you is be careful. Right? When you talk about withdrawing Article 50, whatever, when you talk about general elections, when you talk about second votes, frankly, I'm not frightened of actually a second vote. I think we'd be fine, actually. I think you would be surprised, right? But be careful, because you're actually playing fire with democracy. You really are. Susan just said then, you know, have a bit of respect for people as well. So there's one cultural thing that's happened over the past 2 years as well that worries me a lot. And that is that the people who voted to leave, they now know exactly what the establishment think of them. They now know that without any doubts. They know that they are considered stupid. Because, of course, all you knew exactly what you were voting for, didn't you? You got it completely right. But, of course, Brexiteers somehow didn't understand. They're stupid. They're racist. All of this stuff. That has been the constant diet over the past 2 years. That is terribly dangerous, because those people now know. They have no illusions about, you know, what the establishment think of them. But anyway, my basic point is this, is that this is all a bit of grandstanding. It doesn't mean anything to anybody outside this chamber. But essentially, you are playing seriously with democracy. I think it's irresponsible, actually. So I would definitely oppose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll do the summings up. We'll sum up on the Boff Amendment first, then on the Duval Amendment, and we will vote, however, on the Duval Amendment first. Okay? Assemblymember Boff.
With apologies, because we didn't have sight of this before, apologies to Rebecca of trying to specify what this amendment is. Basically, if you remove everything after because and then put in urges Jeremy Corbyn, blah, blah, blah. Now, let's go back on what's been said, just to sum up on what's been...
They're not going to be able to minute blah, blah, blah. Do you think you could read it out?
You know what blah, blah, blah means.
Would you like me to read it in full before you sum up?
Please.
So the amendment in full, the full text would read in Assemblymember Boff's amendment, that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked. This Assembly notes in particular the discussion around the UK's exit from the EU following Parliament's comprehensive rejection of the Prime Minister's proposed deal. This Assembly urges Jeremy Corbyn to remove his red lines on discussions with other parties to ensure that we have a deal that is good for London and Britain.
Thank you very much for that. You've said it so much better than I could. First of all, let's touch on a few points. I don't really want to go into different ways of leaving the EU, save for referencing those that were particularly mentioned. I unusually am a massive fan of referenda. I think we need more of them in this country because I think the people's voice should be heard more often directly to power. But in all those jurisdictions where referenda are established and part of the Constitution, they nearly always have a specification that you cannot ask the same question twice within a period of a number of years. In some cases, that's 15 years in the terms of some of the states of the Union, and I believe Switzerland as well. So you can't keep going back to the public and asking the same question because you don't like the result. And what we've got to get to the point of here is understanding what the problem is, because there are many different ways. Obviously, people have a wide number of different views about what the Brexit result actually meant, what the referendum result meant. Did it mean a people's vote, and how we deal with it? Is a people's vote possible? Is a managed no deal possible? A WTO terms, as is favoured, I think, by Bag. Is it Norway plus, Norway plus plus, Canada plus, plus plus, plus plus plus, or is it a new general election, or was the Brexit result a mandate to pull out of the Eurovision Song Contest? These are all opinions which people can have, and the only reason these opinions and views are not being considered in Parliament at the moment is because Jeremy Corbyn won't meet with the Prime Minister because of his red line. That's the only reason they are not being considered, because Jeremy Corbyn will not meet the Prime Minister. She has met the SNP, she has met the Greens, she has met the Lib Dems, she has met DUP, she has met all the other parties, and there's only one party that is getting in the way of progress on Brexit, and that is Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party. So support the motion and vote for progress.
Assembly Member Duval.
Well done.
Excellent. A shock horror. I need to tell you, us leaving Europe doesn't mean we leave the Eurovision Song Contest.
Well, I think it does.
Because they are.
That's why I voted leave.
So, look, I thought there's some interesting points. I want to take that out. I mean, the 57 different varieties of way of leaving is part of the problem of what that referendum did. So even if we constructed a referendum in a different way, you say I should accept it, then we should have had a binary vote about what the different ways are. Because the reality is, even though we had another bravado performance, I mean, give the man whatever. If we're doing strictly politician performance of trying and sunny up plans, that was a great performance.
Very
utter
good.
chaos. It would lead to utter chaos, partly because what Peter, I think, was alluding to. How would you have used those 2 years previously in terms of working towards that, if that was your objective? Then clearly no one has, because we are leaving our communities and business, our economy, into a very dangerous circumstances. I am not one prepared to do that. The arithmetic in the House of Commons, in the House of Lords, is not going to allow that to happen. Government has lost control. I think Caroline Russell had said that. It is broken. Government is not in control of business anymore, and we will see a series of votes that either lead to something or nothing. And if it leads to nothing, then we're suggesting a way forward here. And it is for that very reason. So I would say this, 2 years on, those people that led the leaving vote are under investigation, police investigation, and my colleague reminded me that, and in terms of breaches of the law. So we cannot ignore some of those issues that have gone on, because a lot's happened in 2 years. A lot's our knowledge, the experts' knowledge, those in Parliament have now understood much more that it's not simple as just saying, thank you very much, Europe, we're going, and it's all going to be simple and easy. We're all going to get on well, and this is it. The only people laughing at us who are going to take advantage of us is caught between Russia, who in terms of just wants chaos, and Trump, who quite frankly, when he says American first, means American first. Do not think there is anyone who's going to help us in any trade agreements. We are weakened by this process. We're weakened by it. Now, what we've got to do as a country is find a way out of it and make a decision. It might be a decision that I don't like. You might want to wind me up because you don't want to listen to what the chaos we're in. But the question is, in terms of democracy, and what we need to do is make a decision and work out the way forward and implement it. And Parliament isn't likely to give us that. I hope it does next week. If it doesn't, then these are the options we've got to do. And it's not just us saying it. London First has come out in favour of the people's vote. Others are coming on board. Tories are coming on board because they can't see getting past the impasse. And everything else that was said. Now, on the Jeremy Corbyn issue, I think I might agree with you if he was leader. If he was the leader of government, I might agree with you. But it's not his red lines that are the problem at the moment. The red lines are from Theresa May. Now, whether that's spin and whether it's not, that's the red lines. If you want a negotiation, and I've said it before, you give and take and you get to understand it. And you might get more give from Jeremy Corbyn under some of those issues than maybe I would give. But the red lines are important for both sides. And we've always said that about negotiations. So, no, I don't accept your amendment, and I think it's very good. Because the reason why these last 2 years have ended this way, and my last point, is because we've not been thinking about the country. We've not been thinking about how do we leave the EU. We've been thinking about how to keep the Tory party together. And it's an impossible job. It's an impossible job because there isn't a solution that keeps them together. And Theresa May, I don't want to personalise it, but Theresa May and her mates haven't got the courage to stand up to a small group of people and say, thank you very much, this is what we're going to do, and this is why we're going to do it, because it should benefit the country and we're going to minimise the chaos where it is. I personally think, actually, on reflection, I wish we'd stayed and I wish we won the vote. Whatever happens now, we must make some decisions. We must have a way forward. This gives us a way forward if Parliament fails to come to that conclusion.
Thank you very much. Those in favour of the amendment in the name of Assemblymember Duval, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 in favour, Chairman.
Those against, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 against, Chairman. That's carried.
Thank you. We've now put the amendment.
Bailey's not here to give us the mayoral candidate.
I've made the point about mayoral candidate. Do you just call him Assemblymember Bailey?
I did call him Assemblymember Bailey.
Those in favour of the amendment in the name of Assemblymember Boff, please show.
That's 1, 2, 3. That's 4 in favour.
Okay, those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, Chairman.
Okay. Now the position is that the
we
motion
now have a vote on the motion as amended by Assemblymember Duval's amendment.
Okay.
Chairman.
Those in favour of the amended motion?
13.
13, Chairman.
Those against?
6.
Right.
6,
Right.
Chairman.
I'm afraid we still have a couple of formal matters to deal with. Item 6. Can I ask you please to give notice to the Mayor and to Mike Brown, Commissioner of TfL, requiring them to attend a plenary meeting of the London Assembly to be held on Thursday, the 7th of February, for the purposes of answering questions relating to TfL. Thank you. Can I notify you that the next meeting of the Assembly will be on Thursday, the 24th, which is next Thursday, which will be a plenary meeting. Can I ask you please to agree that we expend £10,000 to commission Joanna Chambers to carry out technical advice and support outlined in paragraph 4.2 of the report to provide expertise at the examination in public. Thank you.
Agreed.
And can I remind you that there is a meeting for members which is going to be given by the Alzheimer's Society in Committee Room 2, which should have started at 1 o'clock, where lunch would have been provided.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Let's go down.
We'll go down and see
quickly.
GLA Chamber